a new afternoon conference. I'm Clara Dowd. I'm research curator at the Henry Moore Institute, and it's been a really lovely day today already. Thank you all very, very much for coming. For those of you who haven't been to the Henry Moore Institute, we are in the centre of Leeds. We were founded by Henry Moore, as the name suggests. We hold art galleries, an extensive library entirely about sculpture with over, I think we're up to 35,000 books now, and an archive of sculptors' papers which we manage with Leeds City Council. We were approached by Nicola Greenman in the run-up to Bradford City of Culture 2025 with a view to looking into the William Mitchell works in the city and to considering the future of them and the context in which both the works were created and what in which they will potentially exist in the future. So what we plan to do is a research season in 2025. At the moment, our research programme at the Institute is built around research seasons where we spend 6 months doing a very deep dive into particular subjects. So in 2025, to coincide with the City of Culture, we will be looking for 6 entire months at post-war sculpture and architecture. When this call for papers went out, there was so much love for William Mitchell and for this theme that we think that there is 6 months of material out there. So this afternoon is really just a starting point. It was a way of getting people together with an interest in the subject, with an interest in William Mitchell, in post-war sculpture, the art and architecture of Bradford. And so far today we've had this wonderful talk, thank you Steve Marland, around the work that exists at the moment, which was a real privilege to see. Thank you so much to Nicola and especially to John McKay for facilitating that brilliant stuff. Absolutely wonderful. So hopefully this afternoon we can kind of dig deeper into the things that we saw this morning. So I'm going to hand over now to Nicola, Nick Greenan from Bradford 2025 to say a few words about the season.
Well, I'm actually City Council, I'm not 2025. I'm going to introduce you Rick, who's 2025. I'm an unusual public servant, I think is where we start. I joined Bradford City Council about 2.5 years ago as part of kind of sort of reinvigorating thinking about where culture sits in the local authority. And at the same time, obviously knew that Bradford had ambitions to be a city of culture. And my incredible colleague over there, Rick, who will hear from in a minute, we almost started at the same time. And we kind of saw the opportunity of a renaissance of art, culture and heritage in Bradford. And, you know, and we're hands up, you know, we're kind of at the early stages of making changes and making shifts, but it's really exciting, and we talk about so much about the opportunity and the potential of Bradford is just so rich, and I'm sure we all agree with that. But we've made some kind of changes in the last couple of years, and one of the things where we decided to obviously create a new cultural strategy, which is Culture Without Planet. I think that brought some with us, and you can take some away. And that was an incredible learning journey that we went on with the citizens and the sector of Bradford to try and understand what does culture mean to Bradford, and obviously then that feeds into the big city culture bit. And it wasn't necessarily described in this way, but heritage came through so thick, like it was so important to people, you know, from young people to old people to people in the middle, and of all kind of demographics and geographic spreads. It just came through, and I describe it as really thick, came through as kind of just a real passion. And I think we were doing a lot of consultation and engagement during lockdown, obviously, and I think it shifted something in people's mindsets, isn't it, about how you connect and relate to place and space and the things that are around you. All of a sudden, people started to look more, you see more, when you haven't got the distractions of what a day-to-day has. And so I think that really impacted where the citizens were at that place when we were doing that work. So it kind of set us off then going, brilliant, we've got culture as our plan, but we also realised that there's a real opportunity around, specifically around heritage. And we went and had conversations with the National Lottery Heritage Fund and said, you know, this is so important here, but yet if you look about the amount of money that's invested in Bradford around heritage in comparison to other comparator cities of our scale and size, it is very low. What are we going to do about this? What do we do about this together? So they agreed a devolved funding pot that came to us as the council, that we then worked with a series of partners. We've got things from heritage instigators to an actually dedicated heritage small grant pot. We also work with our Creative People and Places programme, where we've got a large grant pot specifically again dedicated to heritage. And we're in our first year of this work, so this is all pilot. I mean, I'm a fan of pilots, and so we're doing a lot of them at the minute. And it's just fascinating what's coming out of this work. And one of the pieces of work that we hope to deliver probably by the end of the year is a heritage action plan as well, which will hopefully obviously feed into our year of culture in 2025. So that's kind of sort of the bigger piece of stuff that's going on. And yeah, I phoned Godfrey, that's where it started. I phoned Godfrey at the Henry Moore Institute and said, me and Rick have come across these amazing pieces, and they're just like amazing, what are we going to do with them? But I don't know anything about this. So I was like, I know, I'll ring Godfrey. And he was like, do you know what, this is a really exciting potential programme of work we can think about here in collaboration with the University, City of Culture and Henry Moore Institute. So our ambitions are the pieces that you saw today. We would like to find a permanent home for them, ideally in High Point, but we've got to do all the kind of sort of logistics around measurements and all that kind of stuff yet. But you know, this is our starting point. We're at the beginning of this journey, and the part of today was about learning and understanding passions, excitement, kind of possibility, potential, challenges, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, there's a real commitment, and also from my colleagues in the council as well, to say this is a really not. I mean, we know obviously his work is everywhere, but it's just so unique that we've got all these. We've got these multiple pieces. Wouldn't it be great to do something that born in Bradford, that came from Bradford? That Bradford is telling a story of William Mitchell's work, and that's about us and our, you know, us as a place for raising our profile and our commitment and connection to telling the stories of the people that have made work here, or whether past, present, or future. So it's about embedding the real stories of Bradford, the things that have happened, things that have left that have just left in people's memories, and how we bring those back to life in the right environment and with the right connection. So that's me, and I'm going to hand you over to Rich Shaw.
Right. So I'm director of Bradford 2025. Only for a relatively short time going forward. I've been doing it for a couple of years to win the title, and I'm going to be succeeded by the people who are going to have to deliver what we proposed to government. So those two people are Shanaz Gulzar. If you know Shanaz, she was in Keighley. She's a creative director currently in Manchester International Festival. Today is her third day of work at Bradford 2025 as artistic creative director. And it would be great if you happen to be in Bradford, if you take the opportunity to meet her. She's completely inspiring. And her partner, delivery, is a chap called Dan Bates. He's going to be the executive director, and he starts on December the 1st. I'm going to carry on working on delivery in 25 in a very, very particular role, which sadly may not include William Mitchell. On which subject I would say that the moment I walked to a warehouse and saw those extraordinary pillars, the moment that the councillor actually took me into a market, and he just pushed aside a vending machine and said, look at that. and then took me to a high point where there was a freeze. Just thought, this is extraordinary. You have to give it some focus in 2020. We just have to. I don't yet know how, or how to fund it, or how to make, but I had a very, very profound emotional reaction to these works being here. So I'm hugely encouraging them to find a way forward to shout about it in which direction, and if possible to bring it together in a way that allows people not only in 2025 but in the years beyond to be able to take, be able to see it. For me, one of the big legacies could be a sort of initial installation somewhere that is open to the public in the years in 25 and in the years beyond. That would be an enormous thing to be able to do. Generally, cities of culture do struggle with capital projects. We don't have a huge capital budget. We have a revenue budget to deliver, performances, artists, and all that kind of stuff. There is some capital. There are some capital opportunities which we can talk about. What I would love to see that the sort of the shock, the surprise, the amazement that touched me when I first started seeing this work, communicated to a much wider audience. Bradford can own it. So happy to take any questions about 2025. Please make it work. Make sure. Please find a way of giving him a platform that he hasn't had. Happy to take any questions about Vision 25 or William Mitchell. Currently, Chanel schools up in the next year or so. 23 will be a development year for programme. 24 will be a year where we start confirming and commissioning. And late 24 will be announcements as to what happens when in 2025. It is part of a 10-year strategy, so don't just look at it as a sort of single standalone year that comes and then goes. It is part of a decade-long plan driven by Nick and our team.
I wondered if I could ask a question to Nicola as well, if that's all right, but I think they're probably going to relate. You mentioned there's hope for a renaissance, and obviously the 10-year programme is going to support that. You need a lot of money for a renaissance, and I was just wondering more about that devolved budget that you had. Does that relate to the 10-year programme at all? And are you experiencing constraints with that funding, and how is it going to be used as a launch pad for capital projects and stuff like that, or yeah?
So the devolved fund that we have with the Heritage Lottery Fund is a kind of small grants pot, which is more about programme storytelling than it is anything related to capital. And this was about, again, is kind of recognising how important it was, but actually how very few people were given the opportunity to interpret and actually really talk about their own heritage, lived and built. So the small grants programme really focuses at reaching communities that won't usually see their heritage in day-to-day society. So yeah, we're kind of 7 months into that small grant programme, and at the end of it, we'll be able to share what we've added a layer of bureaucracy, and then we've taken a layer of bureaucracy away, because I don't know if, I'm sure some of you in this room will know what it's like to try and get through a National Lottery Heritage Fund application. They're not easy. They're really not easy, and it really puts a lot of people off. So we manage the pot, we do the bureaucratic reporting to lottery, and then we take a layer down of making our system then simpler, more accessible. We'll go out and spend time in the communities, building up that kind of story and application, providing workshops, hand-holding people through that process. So in 10 years, what I would like to see is a far more representative and better representation in people telling heritage in Bradford, because it's it doesn't feel like it's representative at the minute, and by God it should be. You know, if you think about its demography and its geography. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, totally. Thank you.
So, just from a City of Culture point of view, although City of Culture's bank account only has a very small capital allowance in it, we will make a few capital awards, but not in scale. The history of Cities of Culture, of which there have been 3, is that they are triggers for capital investments from other sources. So they provide a platform for applications to funders for capital projects. I can't remember the exact sum, but I think in Coventry, the revenue for the delivery of City of Culture is probably somewhere in the region of about 40 million revenue, but they provided a trigger of something much closer to 100 million capital investment from a wide variety of sources. So City of Culture is a platform for capital applications which have, frankly, greater purchase because of the City of Culture designation. So people who are brave enough to take on kind of capital projects have a stronger chance of landing positively because of the City of Culture designation. And we will partner with people who want to do a separate capital application to capital sources.
Any questions at all?
I was going to say there's some culture that plan books here if you want. Put down here. Grab them. They're beautiful.
Thank you both for that. It's really, really encouraging to all of us who love this kind of sculpture and this kind of project. I think we better crack on with our papers this afternoon. We've got 3 different sessions. 2 of our participants are up there due to illness and location, but everyone else is in the room. And our first session is being chaired by Dawn Pereira, so I will hand it straight over to Dawn.
Hello everyone. So I've been writing about William Mitchell since 1998. I first did an MA dissertation about him on my MA art in architecture, and then I've written about other artists as well through a Henmore fellowship, mostly London County Council artists. And then I given a postdoctoral funding from the Henmore Institute in 2017 to write a book about William Mitchell, which I'm sort of completing at the moment. And more recently, I was awarded a Terra Foundation fellowship to research his work in San Francisco and Hawaii. Sorry, someone has to do it. So I knew William Mitchell. I met him in 1998, and I kept in touch with him until he died in 2020. And he, even up till the time when he died, he was still really exciting person, very encouraging, and I'm sure he'd be really excited to learn about the work that is going to be going on in Bradford, and that his mural is going to be pride of place. And I think he would be very excited about that because he always liked his work to be placed in dynamic situations. And in Kidderminster recently, they've had that work listed, that massive 300-metre retaining wall, and the water feature reinstated in that, and that was actually a memorial to COVID. So he's still current, even though his work was made 50, 60 years ago. So today, in this first session, we're going to hear from 4 different people, and the first one is Andrew Demetrius. Is that correct? Yeah. We're talking to someone who's not here. So he's a curator at the School of Art History at the University of St Andrews. He's working on a PhD research project, the town art of Glen Ross and David Harding. Andrew shared his research in the recent BBC Scotland programme Meet You at the Hippos, which was brilliant. I watched that the other day. That was brilliant. And today he'll be sharing his knowledge on the town artists working in Scotland's 5 new towns from 1965 to 80. Hello, Andrew.
Hi, Dawn.
I feel like Eurovision song.
Anyway, take it away.
Okay, I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, can you see that okay?
Yeah.
Lovely.
Great, okay. So thank you, Dawn, for the introduction. I'm glad you're feeling better. Thank you, Kirsten, the organisers, for inviting me to speak. Yeah, my name's Andrew Demetrius, and I'm currently engaged in a part-time PhD research project, primarily investigating the artist David Harding and his work in Glenrothes, which is the most northerly of the UK new towns. But I'm also looking at the wider network of new town artists in Scotland and across the UK. I'm very sorry that I can't be with you in person today. I'd love to have joined the tour this morning to learn more about William Mitchell and his work in Bradford and to meet everyone. I enjoy the spontaneous conversations that occur when people get together. And perhaps some of you will be able to come to my talk for the 20th Century Society on the 10th of November in London, or to join online. Okay, that's the promotion over. So a few words about collaboration. Very few public artworks are possible without some form of collaboration. At the simplest level, it will be an arrangement between an artist and the owner of a site. For freestanding work, collaboration may involve working with planners and engineers to agree position and secure installation. It may often require off-site fabrication by workshops and specialist companies, or working with a team of assistants to create work at scale. Other public art, such as sculptural reliefs, murals, mosaics, or stained glass, are integrated within buildings and require collaboration with architects. And though not without interest and moments of creative exhilaration, such approaches became a standard practice for mid-20th century public artists. We can certainly position William Mitchell as a technical innovator within the post-war public art, in particular his work to place art in architecture in the new buildings and infrastructure that form much of Britain's post-war reconstruction and urban development. This brief presentation uses the public art of Scotland's new towns from 1965 to 1985 to illustrate how other artists expanded the notion of collaboration to include environmental art and community art, and began to develop what we might call a socially engaged practice. In contrast, it also notes some failures to collaborate to underline the crucial role that collaboration can play. In discussing comparative works, I hope to provide a broader context for reflecting on William Mitchell's practice and for us to think about the collaborations that facilitated the works in Bradford. The aftermath of the Second World War involved tremendous political and social change as the Labour government and so-called post-war political consensus strove to rebuild and improve the nation. Housing and urban reconstruction formed one strand of this social democratic programme. In cities, with, for example, the Abercrombie Plan in London, in regions such as the Clyde Valley Regional Plan, and notably in new towns. The practice of artists working with architects that began in London and the southeastern new towns spread northward via Victor Pasmore's influential work in Peterlee to the 5 new towns in Scotland: East Kilbride, Glenrothes, Cumbernauld, Livingston and Irvine, each of which was to a large extent built to accommodate population overspill from Glasgow. These were developed in phases, and over time each town, except Irvine, engaged a town artist, employed by the individual town development corporations, government quangos charged with managing all aspects of town development, building housing and infrastructure according to central government deadlines and budgets. Financial restraints during the first decades of the work had led to slow progress and a repetitive and harsh living environment. Conversely, political idealists such as Lord Reith and Anthony Crosland advocated for, quote, a gracious way of life, written in the Reith Committee report, in new towns, and, quote, more murals and pictures in public places, more statues in the centre of new housing estates. I was quoting from Crosland in 1956, as had been established by the London County Council. If new towns represent the spatial dimension of the welfare state, I argue that it follows the public art of new towns represents the artistic dimension. Therefore, most of the work I look at emerges from a relatively brief period of state-sponsored utopianism. Town artists were employed to ameliorate the shortcomings of modern architecture and planning to humanise and beautify the new urbanism, an arm's-length state intervention, if you like. The first Scottish town artist was Brian Miller at Cumbernauld, creator of the listed Carbrain totem on the left here, designed when a surplus order of concrete became available at short notice. Although Miller enjoyed a long career as designer at Cumbernauld, almost none of his many sculpture, murals and other work survives. And this is largely due to the work not being integrated into planning designs at an early stage. Miller was the master of responding to sudden opportunities, but the precarity of such spontaneity, coupled with the erosion of painted surface designs over time, means that unfortunately little has endured. The unwillingness of planners and architects to fully engage with Miller's talents led him to find greater satisfaction as a playwright and dramatist, co-founding the town's cottage theatre and collaborating with the community players. The Glenrothes Development Corporation noted the benefits and the problems encountered by artists at Peterlee and Cumbernauld, and formulated a more open brief for their first town artist, David Harding. Harding's position shared aspects of the artist Barbara Stavini's contemporary artist placement group and their projects to integrate artists in industry, as Harding learned to operate within the corporate hierarchy of the Development Corporation, from the chief architect at one end to the bricklayers at the other. One of the key differences between town artists and other public art is budget. Town artists had no materials budget and relied on building relationships with architects and engineers to access their contingency funds for materials. Hence, much of the work is made from concrete, brick and timber, materials that were in plentiful supply in the construction of new towns. Harding's collaboration was fourfold. Firstly, environmental, working with planners and architects to create site-specific work in response to the built environment using artist John Latham's dictum, "The context is half the work." You see on this particular mural, David Harding on the left here signs one facade, and the image on the right shows the construction workers and engineers sign their names on the other side. The shared materiality of art and the buildings helps integrate the art into its environment. Secondly, his collaboration was community-based, and this includes siting work within residential areas, not central plazas and roundabouts, and working with the community, allowing them to name many works, and often working with young people to provide a means for them to contribute to their environment as equals. Thirdly, the collaboration was pedagogical. From 1972, Harding arranged for an annual placement for recent graduates to assist and develop his work, but also their own practice, to gain practical experience that was not available on courses at art school. And fourthly, the partnerships included working with contemporary poets on concrete murals and pavement poetry. Stan Bonner was David Harding's first assistant at Glenrothes, and following the success of his design for the famous Glenrothes hippos, he was appointed town artist for East Kilbride, where he swapped hippos for elephants. Bonner struggled to find willing collaborative partners at the Development Corporation, and he departed following the demise of the ill-fated Stonehouse Newtown project. As Dawn says, his story is told in the film that I worked on with Stan and his son Mark, Meet You at the Hippos, which I think is still available on iPlayer. And a selection of other artists worked after him in East Kilbride, creating a varied, though perhaps less cohesive body of work. Livingston's town artist Dennis Barnes' collaboration included working with other artists as well, notably Ian Hamilton Finley's Wave Wall poem, and commissioning other work, creating a place for art as much as creating art itself. The social democratic utopianism of new towns swiftly transitioned to market liberalism following the landslide victory of the Thatcher government in 1979. Barnes was supported by the Development Corporation to become a private contractor, moving from site-specific art and design, such as this piece, The Old Men of Hoy, to mass production, selling nationally and exporting to the Middle East, reflecting the move by architects and planners away from state and social housing in the UK towards a global export of British know-how. Irvine, it was the last of Scotland's new towns to be built, and their development corporation decided against employing a town artist, instead instigating a programme of artist residencies co-funded by the Scottish Arts Council. And at the time, this concept was new in Britain, and Irvine was a pioneer, certainly in the west of Scotland. The art produced was generally more traditional in form and discreet in placement, with larger work of a more temporary nature, although Royce Fitzsimmons' Stone Dragon still survives on the town's outskirts. So Cumbernauld, Glenrothes and East Kilbride continued to employ town artists until the early 1990s, when the development corporations were wound up. And though new artworks continue to be commissioned occasionally to reinvigorate the town art collections, I advocate the conservation and celebration of work from the town artist era. The legacy of this work is numerous intergenerational reference points and identifiers that enmesh personal histories with the story of the new towns, and a significant contribution to the artistic dimension of the welfare state that remains largely overlooked and neglected. I hope that a collective investigation of William Mitchell's work in Bradford will be able to establish his collaborative relationships with the state and commercial developers, as well as with the historical and contemporary communities that live there. A final thought is the proposition that aside from the different partnerships and approaches taken by artists, all public art is only truly activated when it has an audience, a far wider audience than the art in galleries. And as part of our everyday interactions with the world and the world about us, art for play, art as for navigation, art as meeting points, that form our individual and collective histories. So perhaps, in a sense, we are all collaborators. Thank you.
Yes, William Mitchell's work certainly quite a lot of it was made as play sculptures and intentional that people interact with them. Case in point, the Hotley underpass, which the local people of Birmingham, their local sort of rock climbing organisation have been utilising it. So we'll be taking questions at the end of the whole of the four people. So make sure you write down anything you want to ask Andrew for later, because it'll be hard to remember at the end. So our next person, is Rebecca, and she is a research associate in the School of Arts and Cultures at Newcastle University. Her research and writing examines the junctures between museology, heritage and contemporary visual art practice, particularly focusing on commissioning public art public art productions on the right sort. Today she will be discussing swapping the forest for the streets, the emergence of an urban Grisdale, I don't know how you pronounce that, sorry, Grisdale. That's Newcastle Gateshead. So she's looking at art on the Metro programme as well as other things from the late 1970s. So a very interesting subject area, and I had a quick look online, it was fascinating, so I'm looking forward to this. Thank you. Rebecca.
Okay, hi. Can everybody see me?
Yes, lovely.
Yeah, good. It's difficult to work out what's going on quite on Teams, but yeah, great to be in Bradford, if only virtually. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen, my PowerPoint. Don't want that. Try and find it. Okay, I have to try and, sorry, bear with me. I'm going to have to try and find my presentation.
Yes, showing up.
Yeah, see it. That's brilliant. Okay. Thank you. Well, thanks very much for the introduction. I think you know who I am and where I'm from. So I'm, yes, as was said, I'm a researcher at Newcastle University in the School of Arts and Cultures there. So what I'm going to do is just building on what's already been said, but I'm going to shift attention across from the northwest and from Scotland, of course, to the northeast of England. And I'm going to outline a piece of research that I'm currently undertaking, which reflects on a new approach to public sculpture that emerged in Newcastle Gateshead in the late 70s and early 80s. As was said, this is a period in which the city emerged as a kind of urban Grizedale, a place where sculptors were invited to create in situ responses to the immediate physical environment, although here working with the materials and social conditions of the public streetscape rather than with the slate, stone and trees of the forest. Overlooked in dominant narratives of public sculptural production in the UK North, this is a period that marks a key transition point and something perhaps of a sort of an experimental interval really between the civic sculptural commissions of the 1960s and the regeneration driven public artworks that would become a dominant feature of North East England in the decades to follow, most famously of course represented by the Angel of the North. In the 1960s, public sculpture commissions in Newcastle Gateshead, and particularly in Newcastle, were focused on architectural adornment in the form of sculpture, integrated features, detailing, and street furniture associated with the new modernist buildings and the grand design schemes that were reshaping the city in the post-war period and up into the 1960s. This is readily evidenced in the series of artworks and features commissioned for Newcastle's new civic centre, which were designed by the city architect George Kenyon and officially opened in 1968. These include two large bronze sculptures by David Wynne, here River God Tyne on the left, and Swans in Flight, which is in the internal courtyard of the civic centre. And entry gates and internal door screens by Geoffrey Clark, lighting by Charles Sainsbury. And the building also contains a number of really high quality two-dimensional artworks, including some notable murals by Victor Passmore in what was the old Rates Hall, and which has now been repurposed as part of the courts system in Newcastle, and also etched glass screens by John Hutton. Other public art or public sculpture in the 1960s in Newcastle includes this work, Spiral Nebula, which was also by Geoffrey Clark, and actually just across the road at Newcastle University, just across the road from the Civic Centre, which was commissioned by architect Basil Spence as part of his design for the new Herschel Physics building at Newcastle University. You can see that on the left behind the sculpture. A building which opened in 1962. And then also this plaza piece, Articulated Opposites by Raymond Arnott, which was from 1969 and still in situ, although in a slightly moved position, which was created originally to sit outside the new Swan House building, which was designed by RMJM Architects. And originally built as the regional headquarters for British Telecom. So on the left, you've got a picture of it, not in a brilliant state, but in the sort of water pool that was originally designed into to fit into outside the entrance to the building. And then here it's shifted towards the end, at the edge of what is now a major roundabout in the middle of Newcastle. With the development of minimalism and new sculptural concerns with landscape, by the end of the 1970s, contemporary British sculpture beyond the gallery was taking a very different turn. In Northern England, the Grizedale Sculpture Project, established in 1977 by the Regional Arts Association Northern Arts, was an important enabler of this new approach. And as reported by Peter Davis, who was Northern Arts' very first visual arts officer, Grizedale was part of a broader ambition to build up an infrastructure of support for contemporary artists across the north. And at that time, Northern Arts, which is now just North East England, Northern Arts had the responsibility for the North East and Cumbria. And this was hoped to be done through the establishment of new artist residencies, exhibition and project grants, and specialist workshop facilities. Located in an industrial forest run by the Forestry Commission on the edge of the Lake District, Grizedale was set up very much as a working environment for sculptors, rather than as a sculpture park in the kind of Yorkshire Sculpture Park tradition. The focus being here are much more on short-term residences and on opportunities to realise, for artists to realise their own proposals, rather than on creating a permanent outdoor collection. And following this ethos, most of the artworks produced at Grisdale were created on site, often from locally found materials, and were intended as mainly as temporary pieces. The first two sculptors to take up residences at Grisdale in 1977 and 78 were Richard Harris and David Nash. This slide shows two works which were created by Richard Harris during this very first residency at Grisdale, and both of these are actually still in situ within the forest, at least up until a few years ago in this photograph taken by Amelia Harvey. And this is some extracts here from David Nash's original sketchbook from the time, showing a range of ideas he was exploring in his Grisdale residency, and also an image on the left of one of the completed works, which was a running table, which actually that work has since been removed from the forest. The label, the Urban Grisdale itself, is one that was coined in 1984 by arts consultant Les Hooper, who was at that time working as a public art commissioning agent for Northern Arts. Writing in the book A Sense of Place, Sculpture in Landscape, Hooper draws a specific parallel between the Grisdale approach, as represented in Harris and Nash's work, and what was happening over in the urban northeast, in particular with a commissioning activity initiated at the time by Northern Arts for the new Tyne and Wear Metro, which was a huge, prestigious project for the region at that time. In contrast to the civic commissions of the 1960s that we looked at earlier, like the Civic Centre, Les Hooper suggests that the new architecture being built in the city in the 1970s and early 80s offered, in his view, only limited or compromised opportunities for artist-architect collaboration. And he argues that working with the wider built environment, and particularly with landscape architects, would allow space for a more conducive and organic approach, and thus a better environment for the artists. This work, Garden Front, by sculptor Ray Fulcher, which is at Jesmond Metro Station, and that's actually my my home metro station, if you like, where I live in Newcastle. This was one of the first artworks to be commissioned and installed under the Art and the Metro programme. A review published in Art Monthly in 1981, and it's interesting to note that in this period, magazines like Art Monthly were, from time to time, taking public art, public sculpture quite seriously in their reviews. Art Monthly provides a detailed description of the completed sculpture and the artist's intentions for it, stressing how Fulcher's artwork offers a deliberately playful contrast to the, quote, rather sullen architecture of the station itself. As reported here, this was a low-budget commission, which did not allow for the use of highly permanent sculptural materials. Fulcher himself regarding the work as a temporary piece that would eventually fall into what he called himself picturesque decrepitude, as indeed it has, as we can see from my photo of the work taken in 2012, where you can see that it's been partially demolished, and I'm not even sure if this sort of archway is still standing. So over the following years, and well into the 80s and 90s, many of the sculptors invited to undertake residencies over at Grisdale would also be commissioned to make work in Gateshead and in the wider Tyne and Wear area, including Grisdale's first resident artist, Richard Harris. And while similar in form to some of his path-based sort of walk-through works in Grisdale, this work, Bottle Bank, demanded a very different, or rather different, creative approach. As recounted by Gateshead's environmental improvement officer at the time, who led the project, and the steep Bottle Bank site, which runs down to the Tyne on the Gateshead side of the river, was a very difficult place to work with, The project requiring Harris to swap his previous relationship with foresters and dry stone wallers over in Drysdale and his own hands-on approach to making, to collaborate closely with the landscape architects designing the new Riverside Pathway, with structural engineers on his plans for the steel frame, and finally with a team of Manpower Services Commission trainees who were employed to construct the stonework, the basis of the piece. So to conclude, I propose that this interlude, labelled the Urban Drysdale, represents a particularly interesting and creative moment for public sculpture in North East England. It's a period in which Northern Arts and its public sector partners, and especially perhaps Gateshead Council, were testing new methodologies for supporting contemporary sculptural practice and for engaging artists within the urban realm. Over the coming months, with the help of some pilot funding from Newcastle University's Institute for Creative Arts Practice, I'm going to be creating a series of new public art oral histories that will interrogate the specific relations between people, policy and place at the heart of this urban Drysdale dynamic. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Well, there's lots of questions that could come out of that. It's very interesting, thinking about how something temporary was put into the city. And, yes, that's quite interesting to explore. So, our next speaker is Flo Armitage-Schutz. She's a writer, researcher and artist who explores relationships between architecture, history, people and place. She is co-lead on Leeds Modernist and just completed an MA in architecture and history at the University of London. Today she'll be sharing her research on British architecture and town planner Rosemary Stonestead, an overlooked but important component of the London County Council's post-war redevelopment of housing and communities. And this particular architect worked directly with William Mitchell on the housing estate. So it's something that we hope to explore further in terms of how they may have worked together. So welcome, Flo. Thank you. Yeah,
Let's just click yeah. Perfect. Thank you all. I'm going to share some of my research into architect and town planner Rosemary Stonestead, with a focus on how she is absent and present in the archives. But first, who was she? She was a British architect and town planner who worked predominantly for local authorities. She was born in Wales, but grew up and studied in Birmingham, graduating in 1934. Stonestead worked in Sweden from 1939 to 45, one of the few countries in Europe where construction continued during the war. She was fluent in Swedish and worked for the Uppsala, Stockholm and Gothenburg county offices. She was born Rosemary Smith, but changed her name to Stonestead when she married a Swedish barrister in 1940. Despite divorcing a couple of years later, she keeps this name both professionally and personally, and so that's how I will continue to refer to her. From 1950 to 56, she worked for the London County Council, LCC, and that is a picture of her up there. One of the, I think the only image I can find of her at working age. She was the first woman to become a Grade 1 architect and head a design team in England, and she was at the core of the newly formed housing division and its second ever employee. On her appointment, the council asked her to change her name back to her maiden name, from Stonestead to Smith, because apparently, quote, they couldn't have a group leader with a foreign-sounding surname. But Rosemary, in a very Rosemary kind of fashion, refused, and she kept it. Stonestead's most prominent project for the London County Council was the Alton East Estate in southwest London. It's a mixed development scheme of maisonettes, terraced houses, point blocks, which is set amongst a really picturesque, lovely landscape with mature trees, can't see them coming in there, and natural slopes. The scheme is recognised for its innovation, quality and coherence. Its 10 point blocks, which are these kind of taller blocks here, were Grade 2 listed in 1998 and the landscaping more recently listed in 2020, as there were kind of discussions that they might change the estate. Stanstead subsequently worked for the Lambeth Council from 1963 to 67 and was the lead architect on the Central Hill estate, and that's how many people know her today. The project is in South East London and cleverly staggers high-density housing kind of along and down quite a steep slope. It once included a nurses' hostel, a youth club, doctors' practices, shops, and a community hall. However, it is currently in the first stages of demolition, despite numerous attempts to save and list it. Stanstead retired to Wales in 1972, where she undertook private commissions for locals, joined a walking society, sailed, played golf, and learned Welsh. She contributed significantly to post-war housing, which was integral to the LCC's housing division, overcame significant gender discrimination throughout her career, and was a role model for the next generation of women architects. However, there is no comprehensive understanding of her work or her life which is publicly available. Her career is kind of fragmented and is subsumed by the collective working practices, miscredited, overlooked, or unwritten. To confront this, very simply, my work considers how Stanstead is absent and present across different archives and sites. It asks, what is there? What is not there? What could be there? This method attends to partial histories and considers how we can actively extend and elaborate what we know and can know. To try and trace and understand Stanstead and her experiences, you kind of have to speculate, mix unruly sources, and learn to write differently. So here are a few examples from the Reba Library and the London Metropolitan Archives. What is in the Reba Library? Rosemary Stanstead is present as a named individual in the Reba Library, situated within council structures and projects. However, this is often misleading or gendering. Stanstead is titled Mrs. in contemporary articles concerning Alton East, and this is notable because everybody else listed there is male, yet no one else is titled. Her gender, her difference, is specifically signposted. Similarly, when she was appointed to the LCC in 1950, headlines read, "A housewife with a hand in the rebuilding of London." Stanstead is also misleadingly credited in the architectural press. She's repeatedly listed as an assistant architect on the Alton East project, when in fact, she was a Grade 1 architect in charge of a group of 12 architects. Perhaps most inexplicably, the Architectural Review reported that Stanstead was an assistant on the Central Hill project. The term assistant does not attribute any skill, responsibility, or seniority, and she's since been recognised as the lead architect of the estate by Historic England. And these characterisations have impacted the way her career has been understood, and not understood, honestly, and written. Traditional architectural histories, and art histories, I'm sure, structure the past linearly through great male individuals. It isn't designed for women like Stanstead, whose contributions need to be patiently traced, kind of questioned and considered in the context of collaboration. What is not in the London Metropolitan Archives? Rosemary Stanstead's name. The archive holds the full collection of the LCC material. There are kind of thousands and thousands of documents. Yet I could not find her name anywhere. Not in contracts, reports, plans, staff lists, meeting minutes, images, or biographical volumes. The closest I can find are references to the housing division and the Alton East estate, like on the kind of stamps on the screen. However, there is no material which links her to these in the archive. So Stanstead isn't in the archive unless you have prior knowledge about her and her career, and bring this with you, through you, to the archive. And whilst researching, I found myself doing this, a dialogue starting to emerge between the material in front of me and my memory of kind of interviews I've read the other day with Stanstead. So I'm going to show you some little contrasts there. these kind of different quotes are taken from the archive and from interviews with Stianstedt herself. The married woman's place is in the home, and the home is a full-time job, and homemaking is a full-time job. Stianstedt: I was told that a woman would spoil the atmosphere of the carpentry class. Archive: married women employed in the council service, architects department, temporary clerical and temporary technical assistants, 49. Women filling men's jobs. Stianstedt: in 1967, I moved to the Housing Development Directorate under Pat Tinsdale, the very first time I worked under a woman in all these years. So what could there be? What could there be specifically in the London Metropolitan Archives? Notably, an account which privileges Stianstedt and her experiences. Therefore, I've imagined a narrative which writes through and in between archival images of Alton East and positions Stianstedt just kind of outside of the frame of the image. It shifts our perspective and allows us to see with Stianstedt rather than constantly looking for her, which is what I found myself doing a lot. The lines quivered and cotton billowed in the gusts. She stood next to him, waiting whilst he adjusted the lens. She remembered when the trees gestured to patches and knots and her shoes caught in the dirt, the space quietly crumbling. The shutter clicked. He nodded and she wandered forward. She traced the outline of the blocks with her finger. She still had the initial drawings somewhere. The models were now in storage. Her team had grooved each balcony, painted the sills, and fashioned the trees and shrubs. During construction, she was often the only woman on site. She remembers the long moments and brief flickers, the always being seen. Mrs. He was trying to get her attention. Mrs. Stianstedt, she said. They were moving on. Passing through red, white, and grey and brick, glimpsing vistas of pram wheels, figures, and hallway decor. She noticed a man striding, heel clipping the curb, the ricochet of a football on stone, the approaching murmur of voices. Good morning. Rosemary contributed greatly to post-war public sector housing in London, despite facing significant gender discrimination and prejudice. She was particularly attentive to landscaping and innovatively translated her knowledge of Swedish architecture into her British projects. She was determined, resilient, and has been described as a trailblazer with an inner core of steel by architect Kate McIntosh. After talking to Dawn, I recently discovered that she'd worked on William Mitchellism projects, including the Brooklands Park Estate in South London, which I'm really excited to try and find out more about because I had no idea. And I think it is clear that there needs to be more research done into not only her career and her projects, but also her experiences.
Well, thank you for that. It's really fascinating. It actually really reminded me of how, when I started my journey in about 1998, how trying to research in those particular archives, it was difficult to find anything about William Mitchell. And I suppose in the way he was seen in the same light, well, not as a woman, obviously, but that he, his role as a design consultant was within a collaborative process, and it was very hard to actually find any documentation other than some publicity photos that related, and it meant a lot of digging and piecing together different bits of information, and therefore that's why my book has taken 20 years to write, because it is fragments and putting it all together. And he held Rosemary in very high regard and spoke about her quite often, particularly in relation to Brooklands Park. So it would be fascinating. That particular mural in that estate is under threat at the moment. So the more information we can find out about the history of the estate, the more likely we'll be able to block them demolishing the club from which the mural is within. There's actually a Crystal Palace sculpture in the estate as well. So a very interesting estate. She was instrumental in getting that sculpture from the Crystal Palace Park into the estate. So last but not
not least, is Christopher Marsden, and as you know, he's done a lot of campaigning, and he is, I don't know, you still with the Conservation Secretary? Okay, but you were the Conservation Secretary for Tiles and Architectural Ceramics Society, and I remember going to quite a lot of conferences with TAPS, 20th Century Society, the PMSA, which is now PSSA, and everyone's always been trying to work out how to safeguard vulnerable modernism. So all of these societies are instrumental in trying to help protect work. Christopher's been at the forefront of a lot of those campaigns. So he's completed an MRes at the University of Huddersfield about Huddersfield Queensgate Market, and today we'll be discussing Fritz Steller's ceramic reliefs there and about how they relate to the work of Bradford's Kirkgate Market. And I read his thesis and found it very useful, and it's got a place in my book, I must admit. So thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I picked to speak today because I was aware that we were going to go to Kirkgate Market, and these tiles in Kirkgate Market, I did discover it in 2000. Was it might have been recently in my studies about 2010, maybe 8, and I recognised what they were, but intrigued because it didn't meet my expectation to find them in a 1975 building. So let's start at the beginning. Is it left click?
Yeah. No, it's just needs to be on the screen.
Okay, there you go. My story started with John Bridgman, who was head of sculpture at Birmingham Art School for a long time, and one of his students, Bridgman had an interest in, or expertise in fiberglass, plastics, concrete, cement fondue, and he was an expert in lost wax casting, modelling casting. And his students, some of his students picked up on that. One of them was Fritz Steller, who arrived from England, from East Germany in about 1960, I believe. He was a sort of a refugee from a printing course in Amsterdam, and he wanted to escape that, and so came to England in search of a young woman. That didn't work out, and he, in the end, enrolled at Birmingham Art School. Fritz was very keen on developing big work, as was Bridgman. But he started with a studio in Stratford-upon-Avon as a sort of cooperative workshop called Square One. And his big break came for a commission in Huddersfield, which you can see details of behind him here. That's that picture on the left is 1969, one of the right is 2004. So this is the workshop in Smithfield, a sort of fairly informal crafts workshop, ceramics, weaving, wood carving. But Fritz got this commission to make the world's largest ceramic sculpture. It's on Queensgate Market in Huddersfield, and it's called Articulation in Movement. And the sculpture is about the structure and function of the building and its plan. I would mention this because this bit of film here shows how difficult it was to actually erect such ceramic blocks, the entire process, 50 tons of fire. Right. Move on. Those blocks are about 12 inches thick, about 18 inches by 18 inches, and firing them, making them was an expensive, hand-on, hands-only, manual task. It was an horrendous project, and it almost broke the team that did it. They got up. However, Stella thought there must be easier ways of getting cladding on buildings than ceramic blocks. So he started to use his Bridgman-inspired materials like fiberglass. And this is his yard at Smithfield in Sheffield, where the team were making panels for which could be craned in to a shopping centre and then fixed. That's in Castle Vale, now demolished. But Stella looked big. It's another fiberglass. What makes the cladding a new build squash club? Those panels are huge. You can see this from the ladder how big they are. And domestically, we worked on this luxurious portable housing in Sheffield, also lost. I've got a panel down here which Stella has done, a figurative panel, which was a bit later, but it shows the quality of his relief work. It's later. This was made in Swaziland, where he ended up. That's a long story. This is Tamworth Library, where he's using metallized fiberglass to, and that's still there. Now, he patented a new system called Transform, and I'll talk you through this. In figure 1, we have tiles that are face down in the bottom of a box. There, and you can have relief, you can have much bigger objects deep there. The box is there. You fill it with sand, and put this lid on the back, clamp it down, turn the box over, so the tiles or objects are now at the top. You take off the lid, and you pour on resin and fiberglass mats. So you turn it upside down, lid on there, and so that's now the back of the tile and the top. This is the front of the tile in the relief version. You put fiberglass mat on and lots of resin, so that the resin then seeps into the sand and to the depth of the tile. So you're going to grab the tile while it's in manufacture. Then you take it when it's set, take it off, turn it other way up, and you've got a tile there with a fiberglass matting back and ready grouted between the tiles. So you end up with an object, a sheet, figure 5, where you've got the objects, the tiles, grouted on a sheet. We call it Transform, and he's developed a technique for extruding tiles. So you can produce a tile by extruding fire clay in a long sheet and then chopping it into pieces. So the long section becomes a series of relief tiles. You pass it around. Then, if you haven't got an extruded tile, you can make a relief tile like this one here. You put that in the sandbox with fiberglass backing. These are some of the designs in the original Transform brochure from 1972. And you can see here that the sheets of tiles can then be screwed onto a masonry wall, and where the screws can be hidden by leaving tiles off and then adding them later between the joins of the sheets. And there is Luton Travel-Lodge having its cladding craned in. That's ceramic tiles, relief tiles. The coiling tile passed round is one from Wigan TSB, again fiberglass sheets, and those tiles were in the end rescued after several disasters. I've got a collection of those tiles. The small tiles that I passed around is from Bradford Telephone Exchange, Again, this one fell off. And it was posted to me by BT engineer, who said, Chris, I think you like this one. So, Tunbridge Wells, you see the sheets there. Now, Stella, being a sculptor and independently minded, wasn't a great team worker. He seems to have messed up in marriage, he got financial difficulties, and effectively he sold up what he had, his patents. He sold it to a company, a tile brickmakers called G.H. Downing and Company, who established their works first at Tamworth and then Stoke, making the tiles and transform patterns. So I'm not quite sure when Stella actually did bolt, but he ended up in South Africa, and Downing and others used the pattern. Now, there's on the left-hand side is the end of the transform tiling, falling off the trouble nudge. So it was caged, and now it's totally reclad. This is 1978 project. Stoke Museum had an enlargement, and these panels are from there. They're still there. South End Library, which the interior is heavily clad in this tiling. Stella did bronze work. He did cement fondue. He did lots of other works, but his influence as a sole sculptor was limited to projects which I've been tracing around the country in towns which have no regard or memory, corporate memory of who the sculptor were of his works. It's the same story again. I think we're familiar with it now. So, we go back to Kirkgate. Kirkgate has transformed tiling, but its powers, there's not transformed patterns for their mounting. As you can see this morning, they were on a fiberglass, but with it ungrouted, but on a wire mesh behind it. So the tiling is the extruded tiling we're familiar with, and press plates. Notice the markings on this are markings like those on the tiles in Huddersfield. The Huddersfield project is extant. The market hall closes on Saturday after 51 years, and it's the ceramic mural is going to be restored as part of the projected cultural heart program. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we're fairly short of time. I don't know how you want to do this, but it would at least be good to ask one question of each person. I would have said, because we kind of run over this. Has anyone got any questions for anybody? I hope the other two are still with us. Hard to know. Are they with us?
Yep.
Anyone got a question?
Nice question, which kind of nice to think most speak. All these images, these great images, this reminds me of an exhibition we had a few years ago at Henry Moore about the Peter Stuyvesant City Sculpture Project, 1972.
Yeah.
And when we had that exhibition, it came up a lot. What were the public reactions to those sculptures at the time? I wanted to ask our speakers if they know much about the public reaction to the sculpture architecture at the time.
That would be brilliant if we could just ask everybody that. So, Andrew, I mean, obviously, I think it was quite well sort of documented in some ways that the project was marvellous, but was there much about public reaction?
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey of discovery, actually talking to people in the town and looking at the archives. The new towns are unusual in that, for the most part, their population is entirely new, i.e. they're people that have moved in from outside of the town, in Scotland, mostly from Glasgow. So you might have a small pocket of people that were maybe in a village that was then enlarged upon. So as everybody is an incomer, it's a fresh new community that's being formed, and they're presented with a new art. And it allows for quite a lot of experimentation and perhaps also a more open-minded public that are prepared to accept or engage with new, perhaps slightly peculiar forms of arts that might raise eyebrows in cities like Leeds or Bradford. But even if they perhaps did cause some friction to begin with, there are very few examples of works being removed or vandalized to any extent. And it's usually the case that work that has endured, work that is, sort of concrete or ceramic has endured the best. And they tend to be accepted by the community and over time actually become identifiers of the community. So Glenrothes has the hippos. East Kilbride did have the elephants, but the elephants weren't as well designed as the hippos, so they didn't last so long. But particularly, I think having a different kind of art that wasn't necessarily art in the plaza or art in the town square in the centre, but art was actually in areas where people lived, made a tremendous difference in terms of people taking ownership. I think public art is there for people to engage with in a myriad different ways, or to be ignored. People don't have to engage with it. But if it does provoke a reaction, that's part of its purpose, I tend to think. And in new towns that are generally regarded as being without a history, or perhaps with a more obscured kind of history, the public art that is presented to people becomes their history. And now they're no longer new towns, they're middle-aged towns with several generations of people that have lived there, children and grandchildren. It's a fantastic resource for people to engage with and say, I saw that when I was a child, to say that their children played on it, and say their grandchildren encountered it.
I think a lot of these works, even all the LCC ones that still exist, have got that feeling of, say, the river and Crystal Palace Park, people played on it for generations, so there is that feeling. Rebecca, with the scheme with the trains, were the train stations already there and then they're putting art in them, or were these new stations?
Well, some of the artworks were being commissioned as the stations were being developed, but it was like a long sequence of time over which the Tyne and Wear Metro was sort of brought into action. I haven't been able to find, obviously, that the work I showed at Jesmond Metro Station, because that's my local metro station, I've observed that over the years kind of crumbling into this decrepitude that Ralph Fulcher sort of foresaw for the work in a way over time. But it's quite surprising in terms of the materials that was built, that it was made of, that actually it did last that amount of time, and that also the Nexus, who run the Tyne and Wear Metro, kind of kept that work kind of there as it sort of just gradually kind of grew smaller. They took away some of the elements of it and to leave just the sort of core thing that is in the photograph from a few years ago. I mean, the other works, I should have said that the work I showed by Richard Harris, the Bottle Bank piece, that was actually decommissioned, I think sometime in the 2010s, to make way for the Hilton Hotel, which now sits on that side of Gateshead. So that work is no longer there.
And a lot of them were decommissioned. When you look on the website, it seemed to say quite a lot of them were, I don't know whether they were, were they vandalised or did they just degrade like was expected for them?
So I didn't catch the beginning of your question there.
I noticed on the website that lists all the different works in the metro station.
Oh yes, yeah.
Weren't there anymore. Was that degraded?
I think it's because they've degraded, or the stations have been altered and developed themselves as well. Sometimes they've had Nexus had a really good system of a lot of the work on the metro that's not there were only a few sculptural pieces. A lot of that work is is tiling and vitreous enamel pieces on the actual stations, and some of that work is a notable work at the Central Station, which used to be at the sort of concourse, the platform level, and that's actually been removed when that part of the station was redesigned. But then they've reprinted it and put it in a more prominent position, actually at the top of the stairs, sort of, so it joins up with Newcastle Central Station, where you go through to the metro. So they've had a policy of sort of some of the work has been reprinted and kept and sort of shuffled around a bit over time. But like you say, a lot of it has it has degraded, and it's just not able to be sort of cleaned or maintained in that style. And actually, Nexus just don't have the funding, to keep that as a collection.
To remake work is
Mm.
too expensive. So Flo, is there anything you'd like to say? Because obviously there's been no public reaction to what, but obviously the listed part of alternate estate with the landscaping is quite interesting, because I know she was definitely involved in quite a lot of the landscaping areas on things. So that would be a reflection of her legacy, would you say?
Yeah, most of the kind of public reaction looks at on Alton East in South London. There is Alton East and Alton West, and in fact it was actually yes, they were kind of both by the LCC but by completely different groups. And the second lot is a lot more kind of Corbusian, whereas the first lot is very Swedish. And so there's been a lot of debate over who won, which was better, and it turns out that the architects prefer the later estate, the Corbusian one, and the residents prefer the original one. Yeah.
Yeah, Robert Gibson. I just wanted to ask, and maybe there's not a short answer to this, but in terms of commissioning public art, who defines and who decides what's good?
Well, I think that it really depends on the time and who's, like at the LCC, the Arts Council were involved in patronage of the arts scheme, so they had a big say in who was commissioned at that time. So I think each scheme, it depends who's in positions of power and whether arts bodies come in and advise, and even within the nature of the scheme, even like something like the LCC, which is only 7 years, that changed over time, and people's positions of power have changed within that. So I think it's a very individual, according to what acts of parliament or whatever had happened at that moment, and whether people were responding to that, whether there was funding. It's quite a complex.
Would the panelists agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's very, it's incredibly, and it is impressive. The one alderman can have the power of a committee, and then it becomes,
Could be one person's vision, like in Croydon, a lot of the building that went on in Croydon was one man's vision on the council. So, you read into these histories and you can find out a lot. And whether the client, William Mitchell was very good at making models and doing drawings that were very appealing to developers. And these developers had quite a big ego, and they were quite excited to have something, major on their building or in their building. And it's knowing how to work the situation in some respects.
Well, I heard about Alan Boyson later. He was asked by the Dean of St Anne's in Manchester for a window. And when Alan went with his proposal, the Dean did a dance in front of him. He was so overjoyed by this. And Alan knew then, no matter what the church authority said, that enthusiasm was going to help get in the gig.
But say even like William Mitchell, the enthusiasm that he generated at the time, the person who was talking about the festival, the culture thing, he felt that passion and the excitement from the work, and you want that longevity for it to carry through and still be relevant today. Has anyone got anything else to add? Because I know we're running over.
I'm just going to respond to your question here. First, I'll just check, is there any politicians in the room? No? Okay. When we're commissioned as a city council and as a culture team, I go to great lengths to put in quite dynamic panels together. We do call outs, so we do open calls for work, and then I make sure that we put representative, good representation on panels, with background, experience, relevance, and everything like that. And the one thing I don't have on there, and I don't, which I get into trouble quite a lot for, I don't have politicians on this.
Okay.
Selection of the panel is key, eh?
Well, it is, yeah, people know how, to work that out. So thank you, Andrew, and Lauren.
Yeah, I'm an ambassador for the Bible Society. So there's
Hi
to
everybody,
encourage people
making start with the second panel. My name is Sean Ketteringham, I'm based at Oxford and the National Trust, and it's my pleasure to introduce you our next few panellists. First up we have Professor Richard Brooke, who's a curator and principal lecturer at Manchester School of Art. His research focuses on mainstream modernism, has recently covered areas including post-war infrastructure and heritage of Manchester. And Richard is going to be speaking to us about Boyson's and the Sydney and Collyhurst, I think, as well as the work of Judith Fluff.
Hi everyone, it's been fantastic to be here, and thanks for the invitation. And thanks to whoever turned my PDF into a PowerPoint. This is very much a talk without much kind of scholarly content today. And really just kind of asking people to think about a few things in relation to post-war work, disappearance, some of the difficulties of attribution. I was just saying to Chris, I think trying to describe authorship to some of the ceramic works. It's difficult with some buildings, to describe authorship to ceramic works that are attached to buildings is a testament to the depth and the tenacity of his own research. Preservation. The role and the importance of enthusiasts, amongst which I count myself, and I think there's probably quite a few others in this room who would include themselves with that description, and also the ways in which we kind of ascribe value to particular works. So this is quite a personal narrative. I grew up in a 1970s house on an estate that was part of the never completed central Lancashire New Town, and this sculpture here was outside the village hall, as were. It was erected in 1978 and demolished in 2003 after it was damaged by vandals. It was a fiberglass piece, and much like some of the works we've seen today, it was very much a playground as well. I myself, as a child, used to climb through those holes and into the bushes that were behind it. And this was removed, and there is no trace of its installation. There's no record of the artist who produced it. So this is my next piece of kind of investigative work to try and go back and find out who made this work. But it was fiberglass. Things disappear. These are some of Bill's pieces that were, or one piece that was in view at Forest Estates that was removed at the time that the shopping centre was demolished in the early 1990s. An attribution. So I would suggest that this work is by Bill Mitchell, but Bill Mitchell denies that this work was by him. Dawn, I'm sure, has a view.
I think they're all related to each other,
Yeah.
and then there has to be some connection with it all.
And this work, when I showed Bill a photograph of this, he denied it was his. However, Dawn has recovered archive information that testifies to this. I didn't know you were going to be here, Dawn.
Thank you. No,
But I wasn't going to claim that I made the kind of connection here. And then fiberglass. So as we know, Bill and others worked in fiberglass, and these are perhaps his most prominent works in the northwest. And enthusiasts. So Mr. Marsden here in 2011 did all of the legwork and pulled us all together on a fantastic tour, hoisted by bus around Manchester, tax, the Modernist Society and the 20th Century Society came together. And the coach was full, wasn't it? We had 50 odd people sort of roaming around Manchester, looking at schools that had been demolished with artwork saved, people with collections sort of showing them out of their boots, works in churches, works above old butchers' shops that now sold beds, and all sorts of rather fantastic. I was pulled in because I've been doing some work on the church of St Raphael in Staley, which is behind there. And part of that tour, there was a visit to the Queen's Hotel in Collyhurst in Manchester, which is which is not the richest part of the city. And I have to say, on arrival, somebody almost offered us money to look after the bus for us whilst we were stood next to the bus. But this work in this pub, this is an estate pub, kind of also recorded by Steve here, with, at that time, almost completely intact original interiors as well, and tables that have been made for the pub, really fantastic artwork on the bar as well. And this fiberglass work by Boyson kind of returns on the corner here to the door, but it's been overpainted sort of on more than one occasion. This is me in 2019 on a visit with an artist from London called Lucas, where unfortunately one of the panels had fallen off. After that visit, I drove by this pub with the intention of stopping and going and asking the landlord what had happened to the panel. But as I pulled up, there was some other sorts of dealings going on outside that I didn't really want to get involved with, and so I drove away. And I kind of left it at that. My work really is in post-war architecture, not necessarily post-war art. And I'm not always the campaigning type, let's say, but I do get involved when I think it's appropriate. So I just sort of, it's not my responsibility, this work, and put it to one side and cracked on with other things that I had to get on with. And then in 2021, this chap here, who is Jamie Dale, he got in touch with the art department at Salford, wondering if some students could come and repair their work for him. The art department at Salford said, we haven't got time, that's not really something that we do, and then put him in touch with the Modernist Society. And the Modernist Society, I don't know what Jack's team on, he said, over to you, Team Boyson.
Yes.
So, Esther, Chris and myself, you know what we're going to do. Jamie's mum has just celebrated 40 years as the licensee of this pub on the 22nd of October, and the family is known in Collyhurst. I'll leave it there. So this is the intrepid Chris Marsden, who's on site with me, inspecting the mural. So basically what had happened was, Jamie's uncle had been the tenant landlord here, but was also an alcoholic, so he could get high on his own supply. He hadn't really looked after the building or the artwork. Unfortunately, the panel that fell off had just been put into the cellar of the pub. So when Chris and I went to meet Jamie on site, Jamie had taken all the pieces off because he was in the process of evicting his uncle and remodelling the pub to make some retail space that he could rent out and making the bar area smaller so that he could continue trading. And you know, as you know, lots of public houses across the country closed down. So Jamie's family's sort of dedication to this pub in this particular location is actually, you know, really should be commended. And this work isn't listed or protected, but Jamie also wants to do the right thing by it, essentially. So after Chris and I had had a look around, we decided it was worth trying to do something to save it, if you will. But fiberglass art and its preservation. So it's actually on the south facing wall. So it's been, all the weather comes in from the southwest and the sun's been beating down on it for 50 years. So it's not in the best state. It's, as I say, it's been overpainted, it's chipped. But there's not very much work being done on the restoration of fiberglass arts. This is a piece from 2012 from the Getty Conservation Institute, which really doesn't tell you what to do. It more gives you a set of guidelines of as how to approach a situation like the one that we found ourselves in. Subsequently, I've been speaking to the professional conservator Tessa Jackson, and she sort of tells me that this is because, well, for two reasons. One is professional conservators don't necessarily want to give away their techniques, and also they don't want to be called out by people for having done the wrong thing. So I described to her what we've been doing, and Tessa said, sounds like you're doing the right thing. So what we did was, with the help of the Modern Society and Chris's generous donation of some tiles, was we put out a call for a crowdfunder to raise enough money that we thought would be enough to pay somebody to do the work. And £2,500 really quickly, actually, which was fantastic and really shows, I guess, the generosity of people, but also the value that people do ascribe to works of this period, and even in locations like this. So then what we did was we found ourselves an artist. This is Alice, and Alice had just finished a degree in fine arts, but fortunately spent her formative years helping her dad build kit cars, so has knowledge of fiberglass. And so we decided that we could pay Alice 3 payments: one to clean it, one to fix it, and one to paint it. And last week she announced that she'd finished fixing it, and that she'd found the right sort of paint for the job, which is a 2-part paint, usually used on yachts, made by a company called Jotun or Jotun from Norway. So I emailed Jotun in Norway and said, we're doing this really valid and valuable thing for this community. Can you give us some paint? And they said no. So then I emailed the UK distributor and asked them the same thing, and they said yes. So at the moment, Alice is talking to the paint suppliers who are willing to make RAL colours and mix them according to the bits of original colour that she's been able to get hold of. And hopefully in the next few months, the overpainting of this is going to be concluded. So this sort of brings me on to this, again, this kind of enthusiasm. So I'm an architectural enthusiast. I kind of think of myself as a building hunter. And this is how I sort of started this stuff 30 years ago, roaming around Manchester on the top deck of the bus, looking out the window, spotting things, thinking, what's that? And finding out about it and photographing it. And I was on a walk through Shipley after a visit to Saltaire the other day, and saw this kind of really amazing roof poking out from behind the fence next to the river. Thought, what's that? I went on the corner. It's the old HMRC offices, and this is the canteen of the HMRC offices. But the site was closed. I rocked up these days. When I was an architect trying to get into sites, nobody would let me in a site because I thought I had an agenda. With a professor card, people just open gates for you. However, on this occasion, the security guard was just about to open the gate for me to let me on site, and he said, hang on, I better phone somebody. The last time I did this, I lost my job. I said, I don't want you to lose your job. So this was a few months ago. He gave me the number of the agent, and I was in Shipley again a few weeks ago for a gig. So I phoned the agent. They let me on site to come and see this building and photograph this building. Whilst I was there, I found this, which is a fiberglass sculpture from 1973 by Judith Blood. And this happened as I was replying to Claire to say that I wanted to take part in this event. So this is all serendipitous, or absolutely was clearly meant to be. I only know it's Blood because it's got no signature on it, otherwise I have no idea. And the Henry Moore has her archive. Erin's got to get back to me yet. She'll leave until Thursday to let me know if she's found anything about this sculpture in the collections. But it's not a known work, it's not listed anywhere. than Lisa tells me today. Everybody in the room's in this character, that she thinks she has a memory of it being somewhere else before it was on this site, which is entirely possible because the building for the Inland Revenue, Hansard says it was supposed to be finished in '77. It was discussed in the House of Parliament. And then the only architectural journal reference to it is from 1981, so it's completed sometime between '77 and '81, the building. Obviously, the sculpture's from '73. So, fiberglass lost and found. Takeaways are, I've got some work to do on the one in Astor Village and hopefully collaboratively on this one. And I think enthusiasts and enthusiasms in kind of uncovering and recovering this work and really bringing it to prominence is really important. And I think in the context of Bill Mitchell's work, I think, you know, it's all of us really. It's Dawn, it's Natalie actually who first enabled me to go and meet Bill and put me in touch with Bill and Joy. And Bill and I had some rather fantastic conversations. And so I think that this is heritage driven by enthusiasts and kind of supported by other enthusiasts as well. And I think this network and the networks that precede it and the things that will be formed after it will be and continue to be kind of important in the preservation of this sort of stuff. And that's the other sculpture that I guess it's most akin to. So Blood went on to do much more kind of figurative work, such as the horse in Ealing, some sheep in Rochdale, and the otter in Carlisle.
Okay, we're going from Shipley to ships, and ships in the sky specifically. Just to remind you that we're going to have questions at the end, so if you have anything on your minds, make a note of it, we'll come back to it if we have time. Next up we have Lisa Brown. Lisa works at the Henry Moore Institute and is the author and photographer of Post-War Public Art, a beautifully produced volume by the Modernist Society. Do you want to down?
Sorry.
I think it's excellent.
I can be Lisa though for today.
How did I get those names mixed up? That does. I am describing you, though. Is that right?
No.
No.
The first bit was, I think,
Hi, Lisa.
I'm sorry about that. Oh, yeah,
do not worry.
I just skipped ahead. I'm terribly sorry. So yes, you're an artist working in image and moving media, aren't you?
Moving media. Yeah. I am.
Film and media arts at Sheffield Hallam University, which we'll be talking about the project Ships in the Sky with Alan Paulson's work.
So, yeah, artist, filmmaker, so I've been speaking from a slightly different point of view, I guess, today, and this is all about a project that I initiated back in, well, it was the tail end of the City of Culture in Hull, so 2017. I'm a Hull lass, and it's about something that, kind of a bit of a love affair with building in Hull City Centre. And in 2016, and I will show you a little film of the building, this building was occupied initially by the Co-op and then later on by the BHS. And we all know 2016 BHS folded, the building became all locked up. And I was very concerned for its future, as were the people in the city. I got in touch with Hull Heritage Action Group, specifically someone I called Bird, who we're now very firm friends. She's working on this project with me, and she would love to be here today. So let me show you first. Full clip. Do I just? Can I do it? I can't do it on Okay. So this is a little bit of drone footage that just shows the, and I'll probably just talk about it, just shows the building in originally was the and this is useful present by Alan. The research I've done is biggest present in the country. This building has quite a long history of what's happened to this building. It will be, it's currently being demolished, the building, but this mosaic, and I'll talk about this in a little while, we've managed to get this grade 2 listed. For, again, enthusiasm and love by a lot of people, and yeah, not given in to council, I think, is a light way of putting it. So it's situated, this building, in the centre of Hull. This is a map from the 30s, so you can see here that at that time, you can see Princess Dock, the 2 docks below there, they're now filled in, but they weren't filled in until the 60s, sort of 50s, 60s, and there's a shopping centre there now. But the imagery, obviously, on the front of the building is strongly linked to Hull's trawler industry. And it was one of the biggest trawling fishing ports in the world at one point. This is the building that was on the same site prior to it being bombed in the Hull Blitz. And there was this intermediary building between this being bombed and the new building, which was this 1-storey structure here that was locally affectionately termed a prefab. So there was this opportunity, you know, Hull, as you might know, after London, it was the most modern city. The centre was extremely flattened, including this co-op. So it afforded this new opportunity to build forward-thinking, new, amazing superstore. And at the time, well, when it was completed, and it was quite a protracted process that wasn't completed until 63. It was one of the largest footprints of the department store of the co-op at that time. This is something I couldn't find at the beginning. I couldn't really find much in terms of architectural information or drawings at all. This was the only thing I could find in the co-op archive, which was a very rudimentary plan. But then, with the help of the marvellous superhero Chris Marsden here, who needs many a medal, put me in touch with Philip Andrew, who was the architect of the building and an architect in the co-op architecture office in Manchester. And myself, Chris and Lee went to interview Philip, and I actually now have his archive, basically, of architectural drawings, photographs, etc., including this illustration on the right-hand side with vision for the building, which incorporated works by Alan Boyson. I mean, we could do many more sessions on Alan Boyson, but Alan Boyson and Philip Andrew were actually childhood friends, so there was always a connection there. And so he commissioned Boyson to create 3 works for the building. But aside from these 3 Alan Boyson artworks, the building has this incredible, really revolutionary shell dome. These are some of Philip's drawings here, and it's actually trimmed. That these photographs on the right, on the left-hand far side, I took this July. You can probably just see that the dome is rimmed with mosaic. So it took, you know, it carried through from Boyson's design and the glass tesserae through to the surrounds of the dome. So just a little bit more stats here about the actual 3 ships. So commissioned in 63 and 66, 64 ships. So it's pretty massive. I mean, if you've not been, I really urge you to go to Hull, and you know,
guarantee you'll have a wow moment. And you know, when I was a kid, we used to, my dad used to take me on a Saturday to a cafe opposite, a well-known cafe called Fletcher's, it's no longer there. And it'd be like a prompt for him to tell me his stories of being at sea. So like many people lives, he was in the merchant navy. So what all my work is about alternative, sort of investigating and looking at alternative social histories and how people connect, like people and place, connection and place making. So this project really is delving not only in the sort of life story of this particular building and the sort of fabric of the building and the artwork of the building, but also the stories connected to it. Over 1 million Italian glass tesserae, and as I said, grade 2 listed finally after a few rejections back in 2019. As Lee and I cried, we were Mr. Closer. And this is Alan's original illustration for what he hopes the screen would look like. Now, we don't know for definite, and Chris will probably attest to this, that Boyson never said that it was actually designed to read Hull in the masts, but locally in Hull, people know it as it being Hull in the masts, and Lee talks about how her dad how he sort of traced them around, you know, the letters to her when she was a little girl. So again, a very sort of direct, whether it's subjective or not, it's a very direct link to the power of public art on people and place. These are just a few stills to do with the listing. It was a long campaign, but right just sort of before it was listed in October 2019, Lee, myself, and a couple of other people rallied round to do an open letter to DCMS. Yeah, we ended up having over 200 signatures, some from people in this room, but also, you know, some very high profile figures on there, like we managed to get Sir Nicholas Sirota, etc. And I think that was a powerful document. I have moles in the council who said that once the council saw that, they were pretty like, whoa, you know, the love, not just locally, but sort of national and international significance of this work of art. So there's 2 other works by Boyson, smaller works in the building. One is this sponge print mural, and when Chris and I and Lee went to interview Philip, after that, Chris spent some time with Philip looking at these various plans, and from it transpired that on these plans there was something that looked like a mural. Nobody in the building knew about this, so we notified the council, and after many discussions, they said that they would preserve it. Although it's not listed, they would preserve it. This is how it looked back. I took this middle photograph back in April of this year, and you can see that it's only the top bit where the tiles were still attached. That's asbestos. That's paint to the paint of the whole building, because it's full of asbestos with this grey paint as an encapsulant paint. So they've now been removed, those tiles, and they will be integrated into the new development that's on this site. That's an example there of one of the tiles that Boyson's son gave Lee and I a tile each. And I've found a couple of people now who have tiles. We're trying to see if we can get, I think it's 327 tiles we need to be able to do the full thing. We haven't quite got 327, but we're not far off. So the last piece of artwork was and this was literally built and fish are a little bit, or these fish looks a bit like fish. Very, very similar skeleton outline style, and you get beautiful view there of that concrete dome. And the acoustics in there are just magnificent. But it's all going to be pulled down. And what I can show you some clips of them pulling out that fish meal in a sec. Original drawing from Philip Andrew, and these wonderful ladies were some of the original window dressers, car window dressers. So these, just an example of some of the people we've interviewed in connection to the project, and they have lots of, yeah, they were all very, very cheeky. And we had an opening project event back in 2019 where we had these ladies at the event speaking about their memories. So this was earlier in the year. Again, the council committed to saving this fish mural and integrating it into the new scheme, although it's not grade 2 listed. And this was quite a massive operation of, they cut the fish mural into 4 parts, packed it quite amazingly, you can sort of see a cross section at the end there, and then craned out each quarter individually. This was from the attic of the hairdressers opposite. They let me go in their attic to be able to take these. And that's, yeah, pulling it out. And that's all, it's been housed in a storage, an art storage warehouse in Wakefield at the moment. And then it'll be renovated once it's back into the new development. So just these last few slides are really about the participation in the project and sort of community engagement and outreach that we've done so far. So we've had like mini exhibitions that's been really, rather than art exhibitions, they've been more like research exhibitions out in communities as a way of kind of engaging people and gathering stories and inviting people to share their memories of the building, whether that has been shoppers, as construction workers. We've got a great interview with a plumber who says that Alan Boyce is a very messy worker, and all of his gravel and all the stuff, his chippings and things all went into the drains, and he had to. So those kinds of peripheral histories connected to building that aren't usually recorded, those are the kind of things I'm really interested in. And I did a workshop with some of the Hull volunteers, and some of them shared their own memories. There was also in the Skyline ballroom at the top of the building, later there was 2 other nightclubs, Bailey's and then Romeo and Juliet, so right up into the 90s. So we've also got this span of social history and cross-section, women in the workplace, club culture, all of these different strands, and so we're trying to look at all of those strands as well for the project. In exchange for a memory, people got their own ships/Blue Peter rip-off badge. And here's just some of the people that we've interviewed. And I think I've got 6 people now who've got a ship's tattoo. I haven't quite got to the stage of getting one yet, but maybe I'd go for a fish instead. Some extracts from some of the oral testimonies are on the project website, and also I hooked up with Hull Libraries and the team called Untold Hull to be able to record some of those. What's okay. Well, let me go to the next slide. Oh, I see. Okay. And in addition to oral testimonies, people have been sharing memorabilia and donating items connected to the building, including the lady at the top in the middle there. She had her 21st birthday in the Skyline Ballroom, and that's the placemat from the Skyline Ballroom. So, you know, the stuff that usually gets chucked out. and employees' records connected to the building, and a geezer basically rung me up saying he was an ex-electrician and he'd found about 100 different maps in the basement once when he was VHS doing some work on the building. He thought, I'm going to have, you know, they're just going to get thrown out. They were sort of shoved in a corner. So we've got them. And then the Philip Andrew proper architectural drawings, elevations, and also some like photographs that he took. And so far presented kind of things such as this today, different sort of presentations to different kinds of audiences, and also both Lee and myself have written about projects, been interviewed by again various different kind of audiences, so not necessarily just an architectural audience, but people interested in corporatism, in poetry, public arts. And the left-hand side there is a little publication that I did last year with the Modernist Society, which it was on the sale through their website. I'm not sure if they've sold out the second reprint or not. And just to finish up, during lockdown, obviously, like many projects, it came to a standstill, and I really wanted to do something practical that could help people in some way. So we did a little charity campaign. I did another drawing of Boyson's ships and fish. We paired up with a company in Glasgow called We Are One of 100. We did t-shirts, totes, and vinyl slip mats, and then the profits went to food banks, of which there is a food bank just around the corner from the building. So, and as part of that, created a little film with all of these local people at the bottom here, where they all read a verse from a Philip Larkin poem, obviously the whole connection, called The North Ship, which also talks about 3 ships in this poem. So, and they all very kindly filmed themselves at home. There's lots more I could say, but I think I've had my time, probably more. But yeah, Ships in the Sky, the project's still ongoing, and next year will be the 60th anniversary of the 3 ships. Being completed in situ, so we're hoping to have an exhibition that includes a film installation, photography, some of these oral histories, and this various like memorabilia and maps, etc. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Esther, and seeing some interesting themes of memory and also retail now emerging. That should feed into Lisa's presentation. Very specific.
I was hoping Esther would do it for me.
Are you not briefed on each other's presentations? I'm surprised. But yes, as I already said, Lisa is working at the Renewal Institute and also the photographer of post-war public art with the Modernist Society. And she'll be speaking to us about public art and retail, titled Anything Must Go.
Hi. Thank you for introducing me. Hi, everybody. I'm going to start, first of all, with a quote. Art should attend us everywhere, that life flows and acts at the bench, at the table, at work, at rest, at play, on working days and holidays. And I'm also going to say maybe at the shops. I don't know, do we go shopping anymore? I don't know. We have things delivered at home, shops close, high streets empty, we have empty shopping centres. In June 2022, it was estimated that 58,000 shops stood empty in the UK. And around these vacant shops, there's sometimes some art. Something there to enjoy without putting your hand in your pocket,
some decoration, something to brighten up, something characterless in a corner. These are forms, these are shapes, they might be murals, just something there to wonder about, to clamber over, to ponder on whilst we're waiting for the bus. These just normal things in our streetscapes. And also with any shopping trip, sometimes we have some successes and sometimes we need to reserve judgment and we'll maybe just keep the receipt for later, just in case. So I'm going to take you on a shopping trip. And the first place we're going is Keighley, which is just up the road. And so this is Keighley, this is Rumbold. Now, this is probably the first sculpture that I ever encountered as a child, because my family didn't go to galleries, and that was not our thing. The first time I ever went to a gallery, I was nearly 9, and that was on a school trip. It wasn't with my family. So he is like my introduction to the world of art in any form, without doubt. He was commissioned in 1968 by Keighley Council, and he is a giant of local legend. So Rumbold's Moor is located, it's between the Airedale and Wharfdale valleys, and the rock formations in the area which geology will explain as glacial deposits. Folklore puts down to the giant Rumbold throwing boulders in temper and stamping his foot and splitting the rocks. So his story is entirely of like his place and like the area I grew up. This is him in the shopping centre, as he was. So the shopping centre is grown around him. This is a contemporary image. So the shopping centre gained a roof. He gained a water feature at one time, sadly now replaced by a cafe. But he's still there. There he is. I've got a little quote there from Frederick Gibbard. So, talking about sculpture, his book on town design. So he said, sculpture is there to be enjoyed for its own sake as visual arts and to add interest and visual diversity to an urban space in which it is set. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about the artist. Chris already mentioned him earlier, interestingly, when he was talking about Stella, and I didn't realise there was a connection there. So John Bridgman, he sculpted Rumbold. He was actually invited by Henry Moore to be a studio assistant, but turned him down. As Chris said earlier, he did go on to work, he was head of sculpture at Birmingham School of Arts. He also did some work for the Dome of Discovery and Festival of Britain. I've not actually managed to find any images of that. I think like a lot of the Festival of Britain works, there's no record of it at all. But he did do something for that. He also did a series of clay sculptures for Birmingham City Council. I think there's only one of which that survives, sadly. There doesn't seem to be a great deal about him, unfortunately. This is a picture of him sculpting a piece that was commissioned from him for Coventry Cathedral, the Mater Dolorosa. There was an exhibition, a retrospective of his work at Leamington Spa Art Gallery and Museum in 2013. He settled in the Midlands, although he wasn't from there. That's called Landscape to Sculpture. I also did find out that I think Henry Moore perhaps has his archive with Leeds City Art Gallery, so something to look into once we've finished shopping, perhaps. And we are going to Leeds next, so that's quite convenient. Here we are. This is the Merrion Centre in Leeds. The picture at the top shows the Merrion murals as they were in situ originally. This one at the bottom shows where they are now. So the Merrion Centre opened in 1964, and it's an early example of what we call mixed-use development now. So it has, as well as shops, there's nightclubs, restaurants, offices. So it's really quite ahead of its time. It's like what we probably call like a day-to-night destination, something to keep you occupied all day long. The mural, it's Venetian and Mexican glass. It was made by Oppenheimers of Manchester. It was installed in 1965. It remained at the centre until 2015 when there was redevelopment. And it was relocated to Leeds Art University's Blenheim Walk campus. Taylor, the artist, he was the principal of Leeds Art University, so it feels quite fitting that this is where it lives now. It's quite a happy ending, I feel, for this piece. So next, where are we going to go now? Now we're going up north, going to Newcastle now. This is Newcastle Through the Ages by Henry Collins and Joyce Powell, they were a husband and wife team who created concrete murals for Sainsbury's and IBM, amongst others, as well as a series of mosaics that they produced for Colchester, which was their hometown. They began working on public art commissions together in 1948. And the first prominent commission was for the Central Office of Information, which was the Sea and Ships Pavilion, again at the Festival of Britain. Again, sadly, I haven't been able to find any images of that. So their practice involved researching the local area. So each piece is almost a chronicle of a place. Joyce Powell said, "We aim to put something together which adds dignity to a building and tells a story." They incorporated a great deal of variety, the texture, relief, colour as well. I love these pieces. This is the only one I've seen. I've seen the Stockport one behind some terrace fencing and not been able to photograph it, disappointingly. So I'll have to go back and see if it's accessible soon. But yeah, Henry said that, I like this, he said they like the idea of the work being touched, and he described it as spectator involvement. And despite the spectator involvement, there's still several examples of their work around the UK. And in the case of the pieces commissioned for BHS, the works outlived the company that it was commissioned by, interestingly as well. I'm going to take you to Huddersfield again now. This work's also by Stella, who Chris was speaking about earlier. This is inside the market hall. This is Commerce. It's a painted metal relief as opposed to ceramic. And the reason I've included this is because, as we were saying earlier, the market hall is listed. However, the market's closing. So I suppose this is what I wanted to talk about today, is how this art is in spaces. It's there whether we like it or not. You don't have to make a conscious decision to go and see it. And this is why I find this area interesting. As somebody who wasn't taken to galleries as a child routinely, if it wasn't for this kind of thing, I would never have got to see it. I suppose that's anyway. I'm going to come back to William Mitchell later. But yeah, so this is in Huddersfield. Now, this is a visualisation of the plan for the market hall. So yeah, as you can see, you can just see Commerce is there on the visualisation, so it will remain. I mean, its surroundings will obviously change. Yeah, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see anyway, when it's done. And I think it is an example of how we need to be imaginative about how we use our public spaces because of the changing nature of retail and things like that. So yeah, it's something that's interesting. So I'm going to take us to Coventry next, going on to William Mitchell. So this is the 3 tons. Now I've included it, although it was a pub rather than a shop. However, it's in the Bull Yard, which is part of the later post-war retail development of Coventry. The front elevation is comprised of the mural. It's literally part of the fabric of the building, so it's sculpture as structure. And I've got this nice, some images that I took the other year when I visited. And this is quite a nice quote from William Mitchell. So this sculpture is a solid block of barbaric building material, group concrete at its most brutish. 3 tons is double-sided with the 2 faces treated similarly, giving an exuberant amount of decorative texture on the outside and inside of the pub. Coventry City Council has plans. There's Shearer Property Regen Limited. It aims to regenerate the area with its city centre south redevelopment. The mural is Grade 2 listed, so it if the plan scheme goes ahead, it will be recited. I feel that it's something of its integrity will be lost if it's recited. I like the fact it was made to be part of this building, and although it's fantastic to see these things preserved, I do wonder like how it will change how we feel about it, and yeah, it's a really difficult subject. It's really hard because preservation is incredibly important, but it's what are we preserving? I feel like their story almost gets watered down and lost. I think, especially in Coventry, it feels very much like it's like the post-war centre, the city is like gradually being chipped away at. And also there are unlisted William Mitchell panels in this area as well, which will go if this redevelopment goes ahead. So yeah, so I'm going back up north a bit now, jumping around, so there's some few tons. I mean, it's an amazing piece. It's stunning. We're back in Bradford as we were this morning. It seemed fitting to finish up here. Kirkgate Centre opened in the 70s. It's designed by John Bunton and Partners. It's another of my childhood haunts. I would come here on the bus, come to Bradford with my mum on the bus, going through Bingley and seeing the Bradford and Bingley headquarters there, which were also by John Bunton and Partners, and sadly no longer there. And again, it was amazing to see the panels this morning because it's a building that's no longer there and is part of my childhood. So to see a piece that was literally just on the other side of that wall, it's fantastic. It just feels really, it's just I feel really privileged to have been able to see them. Again, this is a piece of work that it's from a personal point of view, it's very special to me. But I think there's so much in it. You could get lost in it, and I think that's what's nice. There's so much going on. I love the little figures pointing at the fountain. It is a very personal subject to me. This kind of thing. And of course, the City Council have plans to demolish it. They bought the centre for £15.5 million to make way for the city village and houses, and we talked about earlier green space and some shopping. I did read that they called it a sustainable neighbourhood. Now, I'm not quite sure how sustainable it is to demolish a building that's less than 50 years old. But I feel that that's perhaps an argument for another day. Yeah, it's not for today. And I think as well, Bradford more loss of the previous Kirkgate market, which was a Victorian structure, and it does feel a little bit like history repeating itself. I think there was something on the radio, on Radio 4 just last night, and they were interviewing people about Kirkgate, and some people didn't like it, and you can't please everybody, but also there were people there who did like it, and I think I've written down here some things about it. I think familiarity breeds acceptance is what I wrote down when I heard that. I think we grow fond of these places, and we get comfortable in their company over time. Life is very mean-spirited, I feel, in 2022, and we need more of this kind of thing. It's important, it's hugely important. This is just some of the information that I found about the city village plans. And as well, just interesting reading about how it's been reported. We're talking about it being like unloved and empty, and that's not the feeling I get about it when I was there today on a Wednesday morning. But it becomes almost self-perpetuating. I think when you start talking about places being unloved and empty, then it kind of comes true, I think, which is really sad. I'm going to finish on another little quote. Again from Frederick Gibbard. As a physical expression, the town is a thing that is seen, and since the visual sense is a channel to the soul, that which is seen should be as beautiful as man can make it. The town must work properly and be economically sound, but it should also give pleasure to those who look at it. The technical solutions to the functional problems must be fused with aesthetic feeling. So, on that note, also, as well as going back to William Mitchell panels earlier, although I love the concept of them being in a William Mitchell gallery, a dedicated space, I feel really quite strongly that they should probably be out there for anybody, because there is still a lot of people now who either won't or can't go to a gallery to look at these things. So I feel quite passionately they should be out there. I'm glad they're being looked after, and it's great that they're being looked after anyway, but I do think it'd be really nice if they were still in like the public domain. So yeah, anyway, that's my
Okay, and our final speaker is Stephen Marland. And Stephen works a long career in higher education, further education, illustration, photography, and he's worked with Modern Society, C20, and the Whitworth, amongst plenty of others. He's also the man behind the Modern Mooch, which I was delighted to discover because I find it such a useful.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I've even done anything.
He is the Bruce Wayne of Batman.
Somebody described me last week as a national treasure, which I'm happy to. So, yeah, online is a people that obviously that is. Yeah, so that's me, Modern Mooch, which I've been working on for 7 or 8 years now. It's had about 700,000 visits, so it's well seen. So I don't exhibit my work. I do publish things now and again, like an essays pub calendar for the botanists last year, and a book about laundrettes. But mainly the work that I do, I walk to a variety of places in Britain which are accessible to me by public transport, and then take photographs, then come home, edit those photographs, research, write, and post that work, which then happily finds home in other people's homes and directs people to engagement with buildings, public art, and a variety of other physical presences. So, click where you like, as long as it's on the screen. All right. Left click. Yeah. Wow. So I work mainly for the modernists. I've undertaken about 40 public walks this year, normally with 20 to 25 people along with me from different backgrounds. I'm not an academic, and a lot of the people who come along tend not to be academics. They're members of the general public with an interest and an enthusiasm. And it's a very social kind of process. So a lot of the people in the room today I've met through that process, through working with the modernists and going on walks and visiting a variety of different places, seeing Esther in Hull, and more recently Lisa in Leeds. And we were happy to go around the Leeds campus because they make a great play of all the public art that they have within their estate. On each of the pieces there is an information board. Students are encouraged to pose in front of the works of art and post themselves, because some large work like Hubert Dalwood's bas relief frieze, which is on the side of the theatre, so there's pictures of that, young freshers in front of this very important piece of modernist sculpture. So it's a way of, they're seeing the importance of that work. They also have an online guide and a pamphlet. And that's one of the few campuses that I've been to that do that, because the universities were great commissioners of work during that golden period of the 60s and 70s, but Leeds continues to commission new work on its new build, to their eternal credit. So, yeah, I've also done walks for the Whitworth, and this is a case study, if you will, of the work that I was undertaking with the Whitworth Gallery for the Great British Art Show. They were featuring two artists, Mitzi Cunliffe, American-born, but living in Didsbury in Manchester. So she produced a lot of work locally, and it's stuck on the front here. the modernist Nipsey Cunliffe Guide to Manchester. Well, her work was all over the shop, including in Leeds on the Clockmakers Hall. There's a open stone carved relief of meshed fabric, very high up in the air. More famously, she designed the BAFTA mask, which one I haven't got a BAFTA mask, but I can look like one. So it's in size on the reverse as well as being on the frontage. I think she's wearing a piece of her own jewellery there. But she was also involved in ceramics. I've got a lovely Nipsey Cunliffe bowl. She designed fabrics for heels, and she produced what she calls sculpture by the yard. And on the Owens Park Tower, which was designed by BDP, London Design Partnership, a Preston-based practice, which saw itself as an integrated practice. So they were interested in working alongside structural engineers and artists, and Preston-based employed, Manchester-based Nipsey Cunliffe. So it's made up, I think there's 6 different modules which she modelled, and then they were then reproduced in a plastics factory in Lancashire. So she'd taken away this notion of, she said it was too difficult to work all the time carving large pieces in Portland stone. So she was happy to work in sculpture by the yard, which could be bought, some of it could be bought literally off the shelf, which we'll see in a minute is concrete modules that she did called trellis, which pop up all over the show, including in the opening sequence of the BBC's TV sitcom The Office. There's a building in Slough which has now been demolished, and there's a panel of Nipsey Cunliffe trellis on the right-hand side of the screen. Just watch that, don't watch the rest of the programme. The Manchester High School for Girls was destroyed in the Blitz, as many buildings were. And Beaumont was commissioned to build a new building in South Manchester, and alongside that commission, Nipsey Cunliffe to produce a carved sculpture to embody the spirit of optimism. A spirit of optimism, I think, which is kind of congealed in the Festival of Britain. And next week, if you're in Manchester, on the Thursday at 6 o'clock at the BDP offices, there's a talk which is about the Festival of Britain's in Liverpool. This pamphlet this is about the Festival of Britain, which was based on the South Bank, but had events based all around the British Isles. So that's the companion piece to that. I think both Nipsey Cunliffe and Stisdall, who we're going to look at next, were both employed to work on the Festival of Britain. Nipsey's work, again, was lost, huge stone sculpture, and Stisdall's work was for the entry gates to the Battersea Fun Fair. And Wandsworth Council more recently refurbished a lot of the what remains of this huge pleasure gardens, which was in the Battersea Park. And predating that in 1948, they had a temporary sculpture park, which I suppose was the sort of first in the land. But here's this impetus post-war, under the aegis of Hugh Casson and the Festival of Britain, for scientists, designers, architects, engineers, chemists to work together to produce it. And it gave that impetus, which still has echoes now, hopefully, to our great land, but maybe spread a little more thinly than it was at the time. So, devastated by enemy action, as we often are. This was 3 pieces by Nipsey Cunliffe carved in stone, which they're not that big. 3 of them. Britain's past, companionship and growth. And still there, the school has been extended greatly to the front as a more modern build, but this 1953 build threshold is to the rear. It's still there and on public view. Cosmos, which is attached to the BDP tower, I don't know what's going to happen to that. It was halls of residence, but they've not let them for the last 2 years. It's a huge block to knock down. I can't see, well, that they would demolish it and what would happen to those fiberglass panels. But to highlight these things are always under threat. You think, well, why would you knock down a huge student accommodation block? I don't know. So its future's uncertain, and maybe a campaign for the future. This is all part of a walk that we did, which started at Cosmos, and through to Platt Court, which is one of four William Mitchell panels, which were commissioned, we believe, by Manchester County Borough Council to go with housing developments. This one's in captivity. The two tower blocks are a security fence. So what you have to do is wait for a car to go in and run behind it, or if there's one of the residents on the balconies overlooking the entrance, shout to them, "Can you let us in?" So on 2 occasions when I've taken groups around, that's what's happened. Access to, as we were discussing earlier, to great works of art is sometimes difficult, even though they are in the public domain, so-called. And this, along with the one in Newton Heath, is the tallest of the four. The one in Hume disappeared, who knows where. Eastford Court, which was one that Richard illustrated, is going to be part of the new City Council's development, which is now, it was the Victoria, I think it was Manchester North, now it's the Victoria development. It's been part of new housing developments to embrace that part of Manchester, a neglected part of Manchester for several years. It's up to the Sheikhs of Abu Dhabi and the Manchester City Council what will happen. But they did approach the modernists, also figure two, the modernists and their wonderful magazine, to say, well, what should we do with the piece in Eastford Square? And they said, well, leave it where it is. It was meant to be in Newton Heath, sorry, in Collyhurst. So leave it be. And so yes, we had 25 people encircling this wonderful William Mitchell Totem. And then, as Lisa was saying, it's sculptural form as structural architecture. This is the Ellen Wilkinson building, again by BDP, as part of the estate of Manchester University. These panels, which are through the Facebook William Mitchell Appreciation Group, somebody the other week posted a London building which had similar
the Bower it's called
yes.
now, right next to Old Street section.
Yeah, so he utilised essentially the same.
But they weren't the same moulds, but they were very similar
panels,
and similar colouring.
And the use of social media, Instagram and the Facebook William Mitchell Appreciation Society is important in people sharing information, maybe posting the same pictures over and over again, that's fine, but people are getting engaged with this in a very simple, in a very easy kind of accessible way. And what's great, you can't see, there's two features to this. These very organic, rounded, curved panels, and on the other face is very, very geometrically rigid panels too. So there's a real contrast. And then this lovely, warm, rough aggregate. From a distance, it looks quite soft and cuddly, but you get what it's really, really kind of like gritty, to say the least. And when it's lit looking along that side, it looks stunning. Then you go around the back and there's this kind of like secret garden with a funny little concrete sculpture that who knows where it's come from. And then tucked in the corner, the most spectacular spiral staircase, which you can go up and down in.
Is this concrete? Is this concrete?
Yes, that's all cast concrete, but it's using a very rough aggregate and a reddish kind of sand base.
It's a local one, I think. It is a Cheshire aggregate.
Yeah, and it looks glorious. And the building for 64 looks crisp and fresh. It's a delight, it really is.
The kind of arithmetic demonstration on the main block is like the stuff we did here.
Yes, as well. It's a grand bit, and it's quality before BDP lost their way. Where are we now? Oh, come back, Stephen. You got it. Got it. University of Manchester Institute of Science and Technology, the UMIS campus, was taken over by Manchester University. And on the Unis campus, on an undercroft, they commissioned 2 large panels and 2 side panels by Hans Tisdall. Again, a Festival of Britain artist, an emigre artist who worked again in textiles and print, very versatile. And they knocked down the chemistry building where these were housed and placed them in storage. But the storage was at the back of the Faraday building, propped up against some angle iron frames for a number of years. They had pledged in an internal email to rehouse them in the graphene centre.
They pledged in the Manchester Evening News.
They pledged in the Manchester Evening News. We will look after these mosaics. Your mosaics are safe with us. However, that was not the case, and I think Richard notified them to what's happening.
Just been calling them out on social media.
Well, on one of the walks that I took round the site with people was a delightful young woman called Tracy Cartledge, who is a mosaic maker and is also involved with the National Association of British Mosaics or whatever.
BAM.
Yeah.
Best acronym ever.
So, under her sort of like official umbrella, she challenged them, and those are the restoration artists who were evaluating the damage which had been done to the panels, which were then later reinstated. So they spent about a month cleaning meticulously and replacing in the bitumen base each of the tesserae, some of which were like sort of lapis lazuli, gold. So they've got reference photographs to work to. And whilst this was going on, there was a tapestry which was by Hans Tisdall, again, which is ginormous. It's even bigger than that picture. And that was housed in the Whitworth Gallery for the duration of the exhibition to tie in with the walk. And again, was based on this idea of the 4 elements. You can see it in that top section. That was woven by designed by Hans Tisdall, but then woven by the Edinburgh weavers. Beauty. And across from the reinstated mosaics, there are these 4 glorious works in stone, concrete, slate, again by Hans Tisdall, in the chemistry building, a Harry Ferris building on the site. But halfway across, they put a glass barrier, and then built a cafe across the other half of it. So it's impossible to see the integrity of the work.
They actually cut the work.
Yes, in order to put the glass wall in.
So to make it invisible.
It's such a disrespectful thing to do. Given that you've commissioned and these things are in your trust. Whilst they may belong to you, this is public work and in public trust. You should have some respect, Manchester University. However, the dirty deed's done. Yeah, and that's the other half. So you actually have to, when the cafe's open, you have to go inside, climb the stairs of distrustful students whilst you elbow them out of the way to photograph it. And finally, my less than life-size version of Lynn Chadwick's Son, which was funded by the Carborundum Company Sculpture Major and Minor Awards. And it sort of illustrates that link. They were a local company which manufactured carborundum, which is for grinding metals. I'm sure they still need the carborundum in the world. Whether they fund sculpture or not, I don't know. And I was speaking to people earlier about this, that it's the most optimistic sort of feature of the street, that come rain or shine, we've got this huge sun which has been stuck high up on the wall, and on a lovely, glorious sunny day, it reflects back at you and makes you smile, as public art should do. It's an uplift for the folks. So there we are. Thanks to everybody for listening to me and echoing Richard's thoughts about the collaborative process that goes on between individuals, sharing information, supporting each other, and keeping this project alive in celebrating public art in all its forms. Thank you very much indeed.
So we are running quite a bit over time, so I'm wondering if it's best to hold questions until after the final panel, or do we have time for a very brief question? I'm going to repeat to Claire and Jessie.
We get booted out of this room at 6 p.m. sharp.
Yeah, we kind of need to get empty lights.
Yeah. So maybe if we have a brief break, 5 minutes again, go into the next session, and then questions at the end. Is that all right?
People can hold on to them.
I think we have a break and then we can come back and do 10 minute.
Yeah.
It's my bad timekeeping. Thank you to those panelists.
Our first meeting, our final session, we've had past, present-ish, and roughly future now. So we're talking about building the future in the final session. Our first speaker is Natalie Bradford. She's a writer and research based in Manchester. Her interest is in education, social history, 20th century British art, architecture and design. And she completed a PhD at the University of Central Lancashire in 2018 entitled Pictures to School, Art, Education and Reconstruction in Post-War Britain. And her paper is focused on true journeys of Warsaw Peacock and the successful preservation thereof.
Okay, thank you, because I want to start by saying I don't actually know how to say this artist's name. So I was going to ask if anyone actually knows. So Hermes? Okay, so that's what I'll go with. And that might kind of illustrate my beginning point, which is that Gertrude Hermes is a name that might not be as recognisable as some of the contemporaries when we talk about post-war public art, because she was better known as a printmaker and a wood engraver than a sculptor. So my first introduction to Hermes' work was in 2013 when I was researching a post-war scheme to embed original works of art into schools, called Pictures for Schools. Hermes was one of the most popular artists at the annual Pictures for Schools exhibitions in London. She exhibited woodcuts, engravings and lino cuts, primarily depicting animals in natural and historic forms, from rock formations and waterfalls to Stonehenge. And these were sold in really large quantities to schools and local education authorities all around the country. And she also selected prints for the exhibitions out of the work that was sent in by other artists. And it was when I was doing this work that I came across a reference to a sculpture that she had made for a school in Salford. Unlike Pictures for Schools, where artists were invited to exhibit existing work for sale at affordable prices, Hermes was invited to conceive and create a work specifically for a new girls' secondary school in Oslo, an inner-city area of Salford. Installed in 1961, it was funded partly by Salford Education Committee and partly through funds raised by pupils. Apparently, there was a choice between a sculpture and a swimming pool, but the pool was considered too expensive. A nearby boys' school received a quote, but the whereabouts of this is now unknown. To give some context, Oslo is about a mile from Manchester centre, lying adjacent to the Manchester Ship Canal and the former Manchester docks. In the early 1960s, the area was characterised by large areas of terrace housing. By the mid-1970s, the majority of the old streets had been demolished as part of large-scale slum clearance. While there are still families who remember the old docks, many residents have moved out to new developments in other areas of Salford, and the area was rebuilt with low density housing estates, and the majority of which are still council owned. In spite of its proximity to central Manchester, Oslo has been hit hard by austerity and the loss of facilities. Many local people have felt isolated and disenfranchised and cut off from the cultural opportunities in Manchester and Salford. And today the area is going through an accelerated process of development.
Manchester Docks is no longer a place of industry, but it's been reinvented as Media City, and it's full of flats and leisure and retail facilities, as well as TV production companies and the BBC. So its makeup and the face of it is changing really rapidly, and there are huge developments of new private apartment blocks going up all along the Ship Canal, and this area has now been rebranded as Manchester Riverside. So I spent years walking and cycling around Redstone, and it seemed to me like an unlikely place for a sculpture. I started digging to try and find what had happened to it. And as anyone who's ever done any research in this area knows, it can be really difficult to track down artworks in schools. When local demographics have changed, schools have been demolished, they've been rebuilt, they've closed, they've changed name, they've changed type, and in many cases they've merged with other schools. Add to that shifting political boundaries and priorities, changes to funding and the control of schools, plus attitudes and fashions towards artworks have meant that often artworks have been lost, they've been sold, they've been forgotten about, depending on their perceived interest and value. And there was another similar sculpture by Hermes, and that was listed for £95,000 at auction in 2015. So it seems remarkable that this sculpture is still in public ownership. And what I discovered was that the Hodsall Peacock had fallen victim to some of the processes that I've just outlined, but that there was a really long historical memory of it in the community, and that members of the community were putting up an unusually determined fight to ensure that it remained in Salford. And it was originally on a pedestrian freeway, so even those people who didn't go to the school remembered it. And Gail Skelly from the local organisation, also Community Arts, told me people would meet there for a fight, a fag or a photo. It was their peacock. Oslo Girls' School later became Oslo High School, but by 1988 it had closed and the site had become part of Salford College. The school was later demolished and the peacock was moved to a different Salford College site in a different area of the city, a couple of miles away. And there it was embedded in concrete, which damaged the sculpture in the process. And there was a real sense of resentment in Oslo that they'd lost its peacock, and that it was being neglected, and that it just wasn't being shown to its best advantage. So the local community, spearheaded by a man called George Tapp, decided to find a way to bring the sculpture back to Oslo. So in 2012, the sculpture was placed in storage at the Oslo Community Arts headquarters, and the group were awarded money from the Heritage Lottery Fund, and they worked really hard to ensure that it remained in the public consciousness as a symbol of the area and as a focal point for a community that had really undergone a lot of change. And this included working with long-term residents to create a map, a timeline, a film and a drama for schools. And when Oslo Community Arts celebrated its 40th birthday in 2018, it had a peacock-themed lantern parade, and they made a peahen to go with the peacock. And the following year, there was a light installation celebrating the peacock at a big Salford Arts Festival called Not Quite Light. And Oslo Community Arts also worked with local young women from Salford Girls Club to explore Hermes' life and career and its relevance to some of the challenges that they might face. So, for example, in the 1960s, even though Gertrude Hermes regularly exhibited with the Royal Academy, she wasn't allowed to attend their dinners just because she was a woman, and she catalysed getting the rules changed so that women could attend. And at the same time as also Community Arts were doing this heritage work, they got a contemporary artist called Noah Rose to restore the sculpture, and he worked on this over a period of a number of years. And one of the things he had to do was to remedy damage that was caused when the sculpture was removed from its original site. So he had to clean away residue that was left when it was embedded in concrete. And he also found that there were some shortcomings in the original design in terms of how the weight of the peacock was supported. And so to address these, he created a new bronze tube to help to secure it better. And it seems really appropriate that Noah worked on the sculpture because he's based in Salford, but he's also got a long track record in making public art, and he's got his own contemporary art practice that's really interested in heritage, community and archives. And I went to visit him in his studio in January this year, and it was really clear that he felt slightly daunted, but also really honoured to be working on the sculpture and supporting the next chapter in its history. So one of the difficulties was finding a new home for the peacock. Initially, it was hoped that it could be installed outside a new build primary school, but if you've ever been near a school recently, you'll know that they're often surrounded by high security fences, so you can't really get close, and it wouldn't have really been publicly accessible in the way that was originally intended. So eventually it was agreed that the sculpture could be installed permanently in the grounds of a medieval stately home called Osel Hall, which is now owned and managed by Salford City Council, where it's visible from the road, so even when the site is shut, you can still see it. And the hall was once used as a working men's club for a nearby mill, and it's got its own really interesting history of neglect and adaptation and restoration. And because of its heritage setting, Noah had to work with a structural engineer to design a new pin, and he had to specially source some red sandstone from a quarry in Thebes in Cumbria, so that it would fit in with its new surroundings. So in February 2022, after a protracted planning and installation process, the sculpture finally went back on display in its new home. And the picture on the right is the kind of celebration launch event that had like the local MP and all sorts of councillors and other dignitaries, as well as members of the community there. And the picture on the left is a picture that I posted of Hermes Peacock on Manchester Modernist Society's Instagram feed to celebrate. And I unexpectedly found myself embroiled in a debate when somebody complained, but it's not modernist. And in some ways, I can see their point. It doesn't experiment with materials or form in the way that some other post-war public artworks do, including artworks commissioned for school settings. It is fairly traditional and representational in its appearance. However, my response to this person was that the Osel Peacock is modern in its intentions and its motivations. To me, it encapsulates the post-war ideal that people everywhere, of all ages and backgrounds, deserved access to and enjoyment of high-quality art and culture in their everyday environments. And perhaps most importantly of all, it's a rare example of an artwork that is bridging the gap between mid-20th century British art of the type that you might have seen exhibited in art galleries, community art and contemporary visual art, which are spheres that quite often remain rigidly separated. And the peacock's appeal has really crossed these boundaries. And I would argue that that's what has ensured its success and relevance and survival, and meant that it has remained at the heart of the community for more than 60 years, even as everything else has changed around it.
That's a genuinely very good, very successful. Our next speaker, and bang on is John Callaghan, who is chair of the Bradford Gardens Tenants and Residents Association. John is now retired, having previously worked in both public and voluntary sectors. He has an abiding interest in art and art history and social history, which led him to be curious as to the authorship of the 2 murals on the estate. Keen to find out more about them. Although John's always lived in London, his father, however, was born in Bradford, and
family were part of the thriving Jewish community in Bradford in the early 20th century. So John's paper is Recognition and Restoration of Foxborough Gardens murals of William Mitchell.
I've been in my biographies, that's great. So I live in South East London, in London Borough of Lewisham, in Foxborough Gardens, and on the estate there are a number of houses, but also there is, yes, 2 blocks of flats, that is one of them, and the entrance to each of which is a mural. That's 2 versions of one. You see the entrance of one, and that is the other. So the entrance there with these 2 murals, largely unregarded by the people that walk past them every day, every time they go out to go to work, go shopping, come home. One of the murals is clearly concrete. Go back again. Go back. Fine, yeah, thanks. Yeah. It's concrete, painted with bright colours, whilst the other, at first glance, is actually what I might say of indeterminate material. And both appear abstract in design, and neither in a very good state of repair. So early in 2021, in response in large part to the COVID crisis, which has also been a trigger, I think one of the other speakers was talking about that, we formed the Foxborough Gardens Tenants and Residents Association, of which I became the chair. And as has been noted, as someone who likes art and architecture from a purely lay perspective, I have wondered from time to time who might be the artist responsible for the 2 murals. And now, as chair of the Residents Association, I wondered whether researching the murals could become a project for our new association. Now, at one of our management committee meetings, one of my colleagues who works in the Hayward Gallery suggested the 20th Century Society might be a good place to look. So we Googled the 20th Century Society, looking for murals, and then with one link leading to another, we came to the database of 20th century murals compiled by Lynn Pearson. This is quite a big database, as some of you might know. But we scrolled through, we got to L for London, and we scrolled through again, we got to L for Lewisham. And there we have Ladywell, Foxborough Gardens murals, William Mitchell. None of us had heard of William Mitchell, no luck with this company. But we Googled William Mitchell and straight away found out who he was, a notable British artist of the 20th century. And that, by way of introduction, is how I come to be standing here today. So the Foxborough Gardens Murals project, we've got objectives: confirming the authorship of the murals, recover their history, publicise the existence and value of the murals to the community, and identify their conservation needs, and secure funding for the future. Foxborough Gardens was built by the London County Council. It's the last estate that was built by the LCC before it became the GLC in 1963. The young William Mitchell was a consultant for the LCC at this time, and in this capacity he was commissioned to provide a mural at the entrance to each of the 2 blocks of flats, which were both completed by 1961. 2 murals are of quite different construction and appearance. One is a wooden mosaic construction, and these are pictures taken in the early 60s, I think. It consists of natural natural coloured wood stuck to a baseboard by means of polyester resin, which also fills the gaps in between. It's then sanded and polished and then screwed up as prefabricated panels. And the mural is a figurative fantasia. You can see there's a sun or some sort of sun, a bird, and there's also in the centre you can see a tower. The second mural is concrete. This was created in situ by directly carving into the cement render. The incised design was then possibly coated in polyester resin. And it's likely that when this was first finished, it was left in natural concrete colour. There is a photo from the early period that does not show it painted. However, now it is brightly painted and has been so for some considerable period of time. The murals are now over 60 years old and time has not been kind to them, especially for the wooden mural. That's great. That's not been kind, especially as you come to the wooden mural, you can see that pieces have come out. And also, sorry, can you go back? Yes, please, sorry. Maybe one's just not there. Yeah, and then go next one, please. Okay, that's fine. Thank you. That's good. That's good. Yes, okay. So we can see on the right-hand side, yes, you can see the effects of sunlight essentially. That's what it is. It's just the 60 years sunlight is very clear. You can hardly read much of it, and that's why to the casual observer it looks. And I thought it was abstract initially. I should say, before I go any further, that I'm wholly indebted to Dawn here. Dawn to be very helpful. The descriptions I've just given you of how they're fabricated, those are courtesy of Dawn. And in other areas, she's been really helpful to us during the course of the project so far. And of course, knows a lot more about William Mitchell than I would ever know. And I should also thank you to the 20th Century Society. Catherine's going to speak next on that, because it's also been really, really helpful, and we wouldn't have been able to make the progress we've made so far without the help of 20th Century Society. Assuming this is how this might work out, before the Bradford City of Culture 2025, depending on how that develops, we can propose an action research project which will unfold in real time in the run-up to the year of the City of Culture itself. But actually, we've made some real progress so far in the meeting objectives we talked about. We confirmed the authorship of the murals, thanks very much to Dawn. We're now quite knowledgeable in respect of the nature of the commission and the materials and techniques used by William Mitchell. We've also gone some way in gaining recognition of the murals. At the community level, we took part in a local festival in May, and you can see Gareth giving the guided tour, and also Gareth and Ellie in front of display boards. And you can also just see, which I haven't got it, we've got the original LCC, or maybe later GLC, but the typography in fonts is original as well, as you can see there. We've also got Lewisham Council has been helpful. They've said they will add the murals to their local list when it's next renewed. And also the arm's length company that manages the estate. It's owned by Lewisham Council. The arm's length has said they've recognised the importance of the murals and seem to be happy to give them permission for some interpretation boards to be put up against each mural that will explain the ownership, the authorship, and a little bit about William Mitchell. So in terms of, again, the project, what we hope to do in the next few years, we will document and evaluate the roles of conservators and local authority, engagement with local residents, which we talked about a lot already this afternoon, and the fundraising process, which will be a major challenge. We'll come back to that in a minute. Luckily for us, the murals are not under threat of demolition. And so in terms of fundraising, what we're hoping very much is, normally, as we've talked about, a lot of the campaign for those of us who would like this sort of work, it's defensive campaigning. But here's an opportunity for, in terms of fundraising campaign, we can give people who are aficionados of William Mitchell and his artistic kith and kin the opportunity to do something positive and proactive. And I'm hoping that the opportunity to take positive action for once might help lever in funds for the conservation of the murals. And it'll also be interesting to see what impact the experience of the Year of Culture itself will have on the stature of William Mitchell, and hence on our capacity to raise funds. Although the murals are some distance from Bradford, hopefully there will be a knock-on effect. The Year of Culture and the general way that people are speaking more about it might help us to raise money. At the moment, it's a very small group indeed who are involved with the Foxborough Gardens Murals project. And I think if we are to successfully fundraise for the conservation, we will need to draw in more people from London and elsewhere. And if we are to be more ambitious as an action research project to interview residents or to make comparisons with other estates in London or further afield where William Mitchell murals can also be seen, we will certainly need more people resources. So in terms of networking, if anyone knows or comes across a research student or somebody who wants to do a dissertation, do please send them our way. That would be really, really great. And also I'm quite interested at the moment in just reflecting on what's happened so far, in the role of happenstance, the role of chance. To what extent actually success is actually not so much necessarily the product of fulfilling a plan, but actually about whether it's actually about being opportunistic and taking advantage of opportunities when they arise, or seeing opportunities where other people may not have seen them. And also, I think we already touched on as well, a project of this nature is also really tells a tale of contemporary technology. How community projects can take advantage of websites, social media. And this is very much a part of 20th century life, and we take it for granted. But actually, that wasn't the case. That wasn't the case only a few years ago. And a project of this sort would not be the same. The project some of us have been talking about. The projects themselves and the community involvement is itself quite a specific period of time. It's useful to be aware of that, because that will change again, won't it? And how we do a community project in this decade will be totally different from the last decade and the decade to come. And key to my involvement in this project, absolutely key, is that the Foxborough Gardens murals, as we talked about before, in other respects of other murals today, is a time when public housing had status, and when high quality art was not only to be found in banks' headquarters, but was also commissioned to adorn the entrance lobbies of the newest council flats, because art is a signifier of the status of the site where it is situated. And so our campaigning for the recognition and the restoration of the Foxborough Gardens murals is also a campaign for the recognition of the value of public housing today.
Wouldn't it be wonderful if that stays where it is? Right, and so to our final speaker for today, which may include some pointers in that direction actually. This paper, The Future for William Mitchell Public Art, from Catherine Croft, who kind of hardly needs an introduction, but I'm going to give her one anyway. Catherine is the director of the 20th Century Society. She has been since 2002 and is editor of the C20 magazine. She read architecture at Cambridge University and did an MA in material culture and architectural history in the USA. She's lectured to postgraduate building conservation students, is an alumni of the Architectural Association course, has worked for English Heritage as a building inspector in London and the Midlands, and is also the author of a book on concrete architecture. Catherine writes on contemporary as well as historic buildings, lectures internationally, and teaches a course on concrete for conservation professionals at Westmead College.
who is uniquely qualified to round us up today.
Thank you.
Looking
Yeah.
to the future.
Well, I'm not sure that I've got the answers about the future. It's about the grand title. But thank you very, very much for inviting me. And it's been really a fantastic day. And it's been lovely to see so many people that we work with on projects all around the country, and just to get the kind of level of enthusiasm that day. So, yeah, and I knew Bill. I interviewed him for the National Sound Archive, although we never actually got to the end of it for all sorts of reasons. And we did a couple of events with him, and he became a really good friend. So I feel it's been really sad that we haven't actually, because he died under lockdown, a celebration of his life. So this feels like the beginning of something that hopefully will carry on. So I just wanted to sort of say how we've been involved and on what lessons I think we can learn from that for the future. So the first work that we got involved with was this. This is in Islington, and in fact there were two of these panels, and we only managed to save one of them. We were too late for the other one, but it was really encouraging that this got listed grade 2 back in 2008. And at that stage, there were already some buildings, some works by Bill that were already listed, but they'd kind of been listed as, it wasn't really recognition of him as an artist. It was either that he was part of a bigger complex of works, or that like the cathedrals, the Roman Catholic Cathedral, and the Chieftain Cathedral as well. I guess the exception to that was the Corn King and Spring Queen. But that was at the headquarters of the Cement and Concrete Association, and I think really that was listed less as a work of art and more as a kind of relic of that place being somewhere that people came to learn about concrete. I don't think he was taken seriously as an artist. So yes, many examples already listed. Dawn, I think you reckon it's 17, is that right?
Yeah, 9 of his and 8 as part of other things.
That's like the ones we just looked at. Yeah, yeah. And I'm sure there will be more. But this was really just to sort of emphasise, listing ought to be the answer. It ought to make sure that we preserve these works. That's what it says in the official central government guidance. But it's not always been plain sailing even for those works that have been listed. It's great that Historic England are still putting forward work by Bill Mitchell for listing. This was back in May this year, and I particularly like that we got the Heritage Minister saying something enthusiastic about these. But I think there is a kind of ongoing theme about it being about local importance and accessibility and relationship to communities, rather than it being a sort of fine art message. Yes, I'm going to go really quickly because I know we need to be out of here. So Hockley, fantastic, really good news that was listed back in May, and at the same time this underpass in Stevenage listed, like the ones in Kirkgate's been painted, but I'm sure in both, we certainly in my concrete conservation course we regularly paint, we demonstrate how easy it is to get paint off this sort of quite delicate concrete surface. So I'm sure that both of these could be cleaned up. Why am I no longer managing to go forward? Yeah. Okay, and I was just think that the list description for the Stevenage mural, I think it's kind of interesting because I think increasingly Historic England are going to get more discerning about, I think we've learned an awful lot of this guy's work, and we want to make sure we're listing the best or most interesting works. And I think particularly that Stevenage listing, one of the things that really boosted the application were that there were the original drawings, which ended up in the Stevenage Museum. There was correspondence from Bill, where he was really enthusiastic about it. And
And there was a really enthusiastic article from the point at which it had been constructed. So I think that sort of contextual information is going to be future listing applications. And also, this is part of the just general spiel in the list description, and I just think it's interesting that how historic England kind of categorising bills work into that early LCC work, large scale schemes like 3 tons, sculptural works in nice building, you know. So I mean that they're kind of that's the mentality if you're putting a case together for listing that you kind of engage with. And so now I'm just going to show you some examples of some successful and some less successful relocations, not just of Bill's work, but some others. Okay, so this one is horrendous, I think. So this was the Lee Valley Water Company office building, so this was a wall inside the reception area, but I should have come to you, Dawn, and I'm sure you've got a better picture of what it looked like in situ originally, but it was inside this building. The whole building couldn't be listed, sculptural wall, it was just listed in isolation. You know, it was fabulous. It's been on the cover of my favourite magazine ever. But as a result of this, it was relocated, and it was actually physically moved. It's not just that the content, the building's been demolished. It was moved about 100 yards on ground, and it has been rebuilt into the side of a commercial new housing development in Hatfield. And I went up with Bill and Joy for the unveiling, and we hadn't actually seen any pictures beforehand. I think we were all kind of flabbergasted in a not good way. I think the only good thing that can be said for this is I am willing to bet that will outlive the tiny house around it, and then hopefully someone will have another go in another 50 years. But you know, I mean, I thought this was really sad because it was listed. We should have been able to negotiate a better solution, and we weren't pushy enough. I don't know. It's not a one I'm proud of.
It's a water feature as well. It was.
Yeah, and that's not working either anymore. Yeah, really great news about the Kidderminster one. So yes, this one is something that I think is this is much more of a success story. This is the Dorothy Mann panels very near our office, so we kind of could keep more tight control over what was happening here. And also this was building that Goldman Sachs wanted to knock down, so they to rebuild a quarters for them. So the money was really not short supply, and they absolutely wanted to get on with it fast. So they were very, very willing to talk about relocating these murals once we got them listed, so that we had the listing as a lever to achieve a good result. And they've been reinstalled in Barbican, and it's actually kind of quite radically different setting, but I think it does work really well. I mean, in terms of the size, it's magically, and you know, and it is quite a sheltered location, and obviously it's on a building of the appropriate date and character, and legally they had to be relisted, and they are now relisted in this new location, and I think they're really cool. What about it? Oh, you can do that.
We get kicked out of our own meeting.
All right, okay. 5 minutes. Okay, another one that's not so great. These were the Paolozzi murals at Tottenham Court Road. This is one where we kind of 20th century sort of stood back. We were told that Paolozzi Trust were onto the case, and they were going to make sure that the scheme, it was the scheme for putting Crossrail through Tottenham Court Road tube station, so major works underground. That they were all on it, and I was also given, you know, the real strong-armed thing about how if we were to slow the process down, the Tottenham Court Road station is incredibly dangerous, that the evacuation time if there'd been a fire was, you know, much longer than it should have been, and that if I interfered and slowed the process down, I could potentially be responsible for the death of hundreds of people. So we kind of hoped that it would be good, but what happened with the realignment of the platforms, they essentially basically with the support of Odyssey Trust replicated large sections of these fields, which I felt was a real pity. And although they went back to the original Tesserae manufacturers, the Italian manufacturers had actually kind of made their processes much more sophisticated in the interim, so that the new Tesserae are much smoother and more consistent than the original ones were, and they lack that kind of sense of vitality. However, we did get there in time to get the proper conservator's job on this panel on the right, which was very carefully moved and kept within the station. And at least I think that set of showed them that you could have done a much better job on the platforms. The bits over the escalators, the top part of this scheme, it was a scheme that went through all areas of the station. That's just been completely been destroyed. The bits were given to Edinburgh College of Art, who are very together as an education project. I don't think it's. It was a total work of art, and we've lost a big chunk of it.
Off the screen.
Oh, sorry, where is it? I can't see it from there. Oh, I see. And then this one hasn't moved yet. This is the mural on the old Kent Road. And this is a more recent listing case, and again, I mean, this is actually a building I think is quite interesting, but we couldn't get the building listed as well, so it's just the mural, and we hope that this one will be properly moved and reinstated in the new building that's coming on the site. And Adam's got, I mean, there's been really good photo documentation here as well, which will aid the conservation process. I love this one. It's really and then more, this is one we've just heard about, where we, this is again, we've seen some work by these artists before. This is on the side of a cost cutter, and this doesn't look very glamorous, because it actually is a really interesting work. We didn't feel this one was going to have a chance of being listed, but we did write and encourage it to be relocated, and it is now going to be the local authority going to make that a condition. So hopefully that one will survive. Just really to say that we started doing some work on murals back in 2009, and we, you know, it really is, I think, a campaign that had enormous public enthusiasm behind. We've seen more and more of Mitchell's work and more of his contemporaries being listed, and it's always, I think, seen as a very positive, good news story. Whereas quite often we get buildings listed and saved, and you know, there is mixed response as to whether that was greater public interest. So yes, I guess coming to Bradford, I would love to see the Kirkgate Centre stay kept intact personally, and feel that there are other bits of Bradford city centre you might knock down in preference to this, if what you want is a bit more green in the middle of the city centre. But I do understand why the local authority has got to the position where it is now. And certainly if the demolition goes ahead, I would really strongly support it. They were made in the studio and brought in. They're going to be easier to move, much easier to move, for instance, than the 3 tons mural in Coventry, which was cast in situ, and I'm sure it would be very straightforward to clean the paint off these, and they're fantastic. They need a nice home. And again, I mean, I thought it was really interesting that we were here this morning talking about you know, should this have been covered up while the work was being done? You know, in some ways it would have been, I mean, they seem to have survived, no one stuck a scaffolding bar through them. And that maybe their kind of physical presence and their visibility has you know, been really good in making people feel much more enthusiastic about them. I really would love to see them stay in situ. I think I'd like to see works kept in their original locations. That works. Yeah. So basically, yes, I think listing helps. Listing gives us muscle, but what really works is building up public opinion and local opinion and grassroots interest in these works, and that they are works that are designed to enhance the quality of everybody's everyday life. That's a really strong message and a really relevant message. And I think that was Bill's legacy. He was a man who wanted to give art to as many people as possible, as cheaply as possible, and have fun doing it. So we need more of that.
We've got like 15 minutes. We've got 7 papers to talk about. I can only apologise for our timing today. It's been terrible, but there's just so much to say and so much to talk about. And I think that when we come back to the research season 2025, we can really start to dig into some. But a few things that Catherine mentioned there as well have come through really strongly on this. And one of them is making communities aware of what they've got. I think the work that's being done for that is absolutely critical, and it's interesting to see that again and again and again in what Steve does, in what John's doing, in what Catherine in 20th Century Society do, and it seems to be absolutely critical. Hopefully we can do some of that in 2 years' time as well through this research season.
I think the difficulty is that there is a double-edged sword to that, that if someone becomes aware of what they've got, they may sell it off. So I was aware of the one in 5 Point a bit before, but I didn't really do much because I didn't know who owned the building and because it was detachable, whether they would just sell it off, which is what happened to a similar work at the Centre Hotel in Bloomsbury, got sold. So, you know, it's tricky because it depends who it belongs to and whether you're just giving them the opportunity to detach it and get rid of it, you know, and make a quick.
Well, obviously, listing takes the financial value out of it,
but if you can move quick enough,
here's
what happened.
And at the moment, Bill's work does. I mean, you know, the big sculpture case that we were really, there was a Paolozzi building, or the building in London, Pomo building in London with a Paolozzi sculpture that was commissioned right for it in the base, and that we tried to get spot listed, and it went to sale at auction, huge amounts of money. You know, the day before
if you draw attention to a work that might be listable, the owner may choose to take a candle hammer to it.
Yeah.
To make sure. And this happened to me. I've been reduced to tears.
Yes.
Over the loss of works.
Yeah.
Because the inspector has told
Prior to,
the owner they're going to make a site visit.
Yeah.
And then there's arson or a candle hammer.
Yeah.
You
can now get you can get building preservation notices indemnified by Historic England, so that local authorities can put building preservation notices on during the process. We've had one, we did it with a house in Dulwich, and we want to do it more.
I've had a house arson and I've had a renewal.
It's really like
Yes.
You have to really know. You can't just start. What's the intention? Because otherwise you could just. I mean, I know some LCC ones that I have never really put online because they're bronze, and they're vulnerable. And I know that if I started saying where they were and all that, they'd be gone in 5 minutes.
But we're all for community involvement.
Yeah.
But
you know, but we're also what we need is local communities who are watching out for these. You know.
Oh, totally.
And you know. we had a case in Worthing with some sculpture where I was, I had the guys ringing me up and saying, I had them ring up and say there's a flatbed truck arrived outside the sculpture. And so I rang the DCMS and said, we have to spot this now. And amazingly, they did it that day. So, I mean, it is possible to get a good, fast response, but you have to be really, really vigilant and alert. While it is making something more vulnerable for a short period. But it just if you get the timing right.
You also have to know what those processes and mechanisms are, and a lot of people don't. It's kind of making those processes accessible. Like a bit like the discussion about, and I've forgotten the building. Sorry, in Lewisham. But like your community group, they didn't know the route. I mean, they found out the route. It's kind of well, articulating that somehow.
I mean,
the caseworkers at C20 would love to hear from you.
We're doing what we can to make the messages as make our information as accessible as possible.
Catherine, it wasn't a criticism. Obviously, I think what you do is amazing. I'm just saying there's a lot of barriers to some people who are either shy or a bit like Lisa saying about stepping into the gallery, that don't feel comfortable in that arena.
Feeling that, and we always say to people, any member of the public can put a building in for listing. You just have to upload your photos and you don't need to have that much information. You can just get the process going. But quite often people don't want to do it themselves, and
And once you take it on, it's a long journey.
Well, I know, and then you get
it
like
takes
the
over your
last 20
life.
years.
And then all the effort you put in and all the information you gathered was the reason it happened. And that's the thing, you've got, it's a bit of luck as well, isn't it? If you can find that information that gives you that extra edge. Like they were saying about the Stevenage ones, those images of the working drawings and all that has really given that.
I think that gave
the
poignancy it really needed.
And
a useful basis for kind of talking about it more and making it relevant again.
It's always a shame though they didn't list the other one. I know it doesn't seem so important, but I feel sad if that one goes.
What, the other underpass?
Because I've realised that was all linked to his Hawaii trips and and it reflects some of his work in San Francisco. And so, well, one of those things. But I think they are definitely trying to restore those. They're trying to get funding to do that for next year.
Restore that one.
And parallel to what's happening in Bradford, they're celebrating their 50th anniversary next year in Stevenage, and they're hoping to get some funding to do some kind of exhibition next year about those. And actually, we rediscovered some more of the original they tried out a few prototypes of the murals, and they are actually in a school on the outskirts of Stevenage. So there's an image they've got of them like just having been cast. I think it's probably like he did them just to show the contractors what to do, or trying out maybe different cements or aggregates, don't know. And then we worked out that they're actually in a school. So I haven't visited them yet, but it'd be quite exciting.
Well, one thing I was wondering about was, it's touched on, but now in terms of demolition, a lot is with much higher profile now of the carbon costs of that, and then the big test case coming up with the Marks and Spencer's.
The Marks and Spencer's inquiries happening at the moment.
Exactly, and because that will make a big difference, I think, to depending on how that goes in a way, that will help or hinder the arguments for demolition.
Absolutely. I mean, we've been making the embodied carbon argument for years, because it's really great to see it getting much more traction. I put myself on a train that I have to be on the specific train, so I'm going to be really, really go.
What time do you do that?
6:07.
It's been a long day. It's been a long exciting.
Thank you, Claire and Kirsty, as well. Thank you very much.
It's been brilliant.
Thanks for making it happen. And it's so nice to be in a room all together. Thanks to our colleagues at Bradford Council.